Well, good morning. For those who are here present and present in another way, just want to give you a brief introduction on my background and what I do. My name is Dr. Jose Martinez. My background is in cardiology in a field called interventional cardiology, which is basically the people who do invasive procedures for cardiac issues. I don't do that anymore. If you see on the introduction slide, there's a thing called CMO. I work at a facility, a hospital, and CMO is for the Chief Medical Officer. And that's an administrative position. It's an executive administrative position. And it kind of highlights what's been going on with healthcare in the United States, where you have so many different issues that play into how we deliver healthcare, and you need some translation between the administrative components of it and the clinical components of it. And it's not as hard as we would think. Primarily, if you put the patient first, it all makes sense. So the conference lecture I'm going to provide today, I divided it in two parts. And it has to do with your module syllabus, and I was thinking how to best get through that material. Very large amount of material, actually. There's books and lectures and conferences that you can attend about each one of these topics. And within those, there are multiple other topics that also have their own authoritative component. But I thought, well, let's look at it from a practical perspective so we can get an understanding, first of all, where we are, what's happening, where we may be going, in a format where we have a foundation, and then we can move on to possibly some discussion or at least thought process if we can't have a dialogue about the issues. All right, so I want to start. Let's see if I can get this in the appropriate fashion to work. No? Maybe not. I want to go to the next slide, so I share didn't do it. Oh, okay. All right. So basically, the question that we start off, or the statement we start off with, hi, good morning, is, hi. Good morning, is primarily how we got here. And when I say here, it would mean the current state that we find ourselves in. And just to reintroduce, we're just starting off now. We're going to look at the development of the healthcare system to where it is currently, and then we'll have some polemic discussions based on articles and impressions that others have already provided. So from a framework, one of the earliest healthcare structures is public health. If we look when public health started, in the mind of the moniker public health, it's actually not that long ago. Public health is a phenomenon of people living together. So when we were very rural societies, you didn't really need public health because people were so far apart, you wouldn't need to work within a community. And that would be the thought process. But actually, if you look back towards biblical times in scripture, date back thousands of years, you can see examples already of the need for public health. In the Old Testament, Numbers 21, chapter 21, 7 through 9, it says, "So the people came to Moses and said, 'We have sinned because we have spoken against the Lord and you. Intercede with the Lord that he may remove the serpents from us.' And Moses interceded for the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Make a fiery serpent and set it on a standard. And it shall come about that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, he will live.' And Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a standard. And it came about that if a serpent bit any man, when he looked at the bronze serpent, he lived." So how does that relate to healthcare? Well, one of the symbols of U.S. healthcare is the caduceus. And there's different stories on how that came about. But it basically, it's a sign. That sign is made to broadcasts that healthcare can be achieved at this point. Okay? The problem was snakes. It was a public problem. Everyone within Israel at that time in the desert was suffering from snake bites. They needed a general solution, not an individual solution. The snake said, here, come here, and you will have healing. Okay? Awareness. Okay? So for everyone, and people became aware of the opportunity. It was educational. What can you do? It was organized. So you had the issue, you would go to a place and you would receive what you needed. It was regulated. You had to go there. It was created by the authority, how you would handle this issue. And it provided access, right? You just put up God's command and everyone could come and receive healing. There were no barriers. The U.S. public health system provides these same type of interventions through its hospitals, its clinics, and monitors for public health risks. So very similar to the story we read. I don't have a pointer, I have a big ruler. So a current example is the vaccination process that the public health system works through yearly. So most of us are given the opportunity to receive the vaccine, usually around this time of year to prepare for the oncoming flu season. That would be a general intervention, a public health event. So looking at public health policy in the United States, we can see that true public health started as an enacted law in the 1940s. The act had some major components. It was initially started out to quarantine infections. That was more or less the height of clinical management at the time. But later on, it evolved as clinical medicine evolved to involve itself in other aspects of clinical care. In 1971, we have the National Cancer Act. In 96, we have HIPAA, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but was basically an opportunity for people to continue with healthcare despite where they may be at any particular time within transitions of their workplace. The Muscular Dystrophy Community Assistance Research Program developed, so now we're looking at specific disease process which were helped for a general population from the government. Cancer Research Investment Act, Newborn Screening Act, and then finally the components in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which we'll talk a lot about today, which is also known as Obamacare. Why do we have healthcare systems? Luke 5:19. But not finding any way to bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the roof and let him down through the tiles with his stretcher into the middle of the crowd in front of Jesus. This scripture describes a basic issue in healthcare: access. Healthcare is a universal need. How do you get it to all the people who need it? Okay. In the scripture, obviously, they were very intuitive and imaginative, and we're able to bring the person down through the barrier of the roof to the healing event. That's a fundamental component that we have to keep in mind when we discuss the evolution of healthcare. So we have now the public health component, where we have an availability for all and the component of access. So slowly we're building what it is that we need or we want from a healthcare system. Do moral and ethical principles apply to healthcare? Catholic Catechism, 1808, 1807. Justice is a moral virtue. I don't want to read the whole thing, but justice is a component that we have to keep in mind. What is just? What is justice?
The right thing.
The right thing. That's one of the components of it.
Equality.
Equality, very important component. The good thing, the right thing, equality.
Unfair.
And fair. Fairness is another component, which may be right, not right.
But that was
Dignity of the person.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
The dignity of a human being.
The dignity of a human being plays a very key point, especially from a perspective of Catholic anthropology, where we see each individual as having a dignity unto themselves, and therefore we treat each other with that same dignity. And that creates the equality, and that creates our foundation for fairness. Catholic Catechism 2411. Contracts are subject to commutative justice. So there's a type of justice that is also within our foundations. Now, there is also legal justice. And that's the format that when most people think of justice, they apply their experiences to how the process would work. You can use it from a moral and ethical component as a fundamental issue, or you can use it from the perspective of a legal issue and redefine ethics, which we'll see is what has happened now in our healthcare system. So types of justice, we mentioned some already. We have commutative justice. We have distributive justice, and we'll focus on those. We have contributive and legal justice, and they interplay. And then we have social justice, which is an outcome, if you look at it from an ethical and moral perspective. The commandments always bear onto true justice, which is the justice of our Lord God. It's a little bit different, but in the same way, it's applicable because we are created by a divine presence. The patristics spoke of justice. We have here, it's not imaging that well, but we have St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure, who spoke of commutative justice and distributive justice. And St. Augustine spoke of the personal economy, which is the balance where we have an end which is just. And that's, I think, what we referred to earlier as our concept in general of fairness. Where does that concept of commutative and distributive justice come from? It's ancient from Aristotle, Greek philosopher. Commutative or rectificatory justice, it rectifies, if I could say it as best as I can. Justice to preserve or restitute the legitimate status. Distributive justice is in order to order the collective gains and honor. Commutative justice and distributive justice, in Aristotle's eyes, were complementary. If we look at it in more modern terms, individual rights and social responsibility should balance each other. So a little bit on commutative justice. There's different perspectives on it. From the Catholic perspective, the virtue that regulates those actions which involve the rights between one individual and another individual. Example, if a person steals another's money, he or she violates commutative justice. Any violation of commutative justice imposes on the guilty party the duty of restitution. So in other words, it's that contractual component between two people. Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
If you look at it from a more modernistic perspective, commutative justice can be redefined as members of a group are treated equally, for example, under the law. Okay? That's very far away, actually, from the individual component that Aristotle first proposed. More specifically in healthcare, there's a term that we can use within altruism. That means a basic sense of doing the right thing, right? And they describe that in the interchange a little bit more like commutative individual, which is a healthcare professional is obligated to attend the best interest of the patients rather than self-interest. So that's the contract. Okay. Now, within the components of justice, I'm introducing this concept just so we can put them together. And contributive justice refers to what individuals owe to society for the common good. Very clear example would be taxes. Okay, so that would be contributive justice. It helps out everyone, but it comes from the individual. When we construct those together, you see that it's a continuum and an interaction between distributive, commutative, and contributive justice that creates the overall social justice, which is the foundation of how we look at bioethics in current times. Another term, we introduced distributive justice. There are several types of distributive justice. In fundamental, distributed benefits and burdens equally to equals and unequally to unequals. In other words, those who have give, those who may not have get, but it doesn't necessarily have to be equal. It doesn't necessarily have to be unequal. It's just the process. In egalitarian justice, distributive justice egalitarian model, distribution is equal to everyone. Okay, egalitarian, the brotherhood, everyone's the same. We all distribute to each other. Very similar to the communal life of the apostles. Very similar to communism. Could go either way. Capitalist model distribute by the contributions. Okay, what does that mean? You have to pay for things. Okay, so you distribute, you pay, you get something back. Somebody gets more or less, but each get what they want. Okay? Socialism. Distribute by need and ability. That's regulated. So somebody has to define who needs and who has. So that's more socially based. Libertarian model, everybody just does what they want. And Rawls' model is more philosophical. And it brings us to our modern day thinking of distributive justice. It's distribute by equal liberty, equal opportunity, and needs of the disadvantaged. So it sounds, from our perspective in modern times, that that's very morally based.
Can you give examples of that?
Yes. Rawls' philosophy would be what we call currently, in political terms, liberalism, where the government liberally would be able to provide for the needs of others using the resources that it may be able to garnish from those who are able to provide the resource. Okay? So it's very similar to the socialist component, except that there's one key word: equal liberty, equal opportunity. Okay? So everybody has to end up the same.
That's similar to the Democrats and Republicans, that they has like a meat product, and Democrats are more for poor people and Republicans are more for rich people, something like that. They give more.
That would be a general perception, true. Okay? And that has to do with the political arms of this, and that's why I use that example.
Yeah.
Republicans tend to be more conservative as far as conserve the current state of government intervention. Democrats tend to be more liberal, which is they would like to expand the state of government intervention. They're extremes. Okay? In the created world, nothing is perfect. So one side and the other side, they each have their point, but neither one is going to work 100%. Those are political and legal justice ramifications. These are more moral, ethical justice structures. So these can fall in any one of the different categories within the political realm. And they have at different times in history. If you look throughout the history of these political parties, they've been more or less within this structure, depending on what has been going on at the time that they may or may not be in power. Okay?
Politicals go in.
They use this. They use distributive justice and they use commutative justice.
80% of libertarian by free choices, like choice to be abortion or no, pro-abortion.
It could be that, exactly. So you have the opportunity to say, I will not participate in an end-of-life event. You have the right to say, I want an end-of-life event. They're both liberal. You both have the same right to do whatever you want. But it depends then on policy. And this is what really politics comes down to. On policy, and which policy is more dominant at any particular time, that justice is expressed. Okay? Do we get that concept? Okay. And this is in general, again, we wanted to speak with the foundation of how we're going to think about the process, so we can see how we got to where we are, and we can judge the current state for what it is. Okay. So within distributive justice, there is a component of what we spoke about earlier, fairness, which basically has to do with, is it good for each side? Right? That doesn't mean it's equal, but is it good for each side? Equality can end up in communism. Communism is a philosophy, but it's also a political construct, and it's also a social construct. It's based on distributive justice, but it doesn't mean that distributive justice is equal to communism. It's equal to fairness. Okay? So if I,
Distributive justice is equal to fairness.
yes. Distributive justice is equal to fairness in the way that the exchange occurs, but it's in a broader perspective than commutative. They're very similar. One, commutative is more individual, distributive is more public, more social based. Okay? So in fairness, in distributive justice, we have, let's say, an automobile purchasing event. Okay? You can look at that from the perspective of the commutative. I myself buy a car from another person, or you can look at it from a market event. People buy cars. Okay? In the distributive component, you look at it as an event. People who have enough money to get a car from people who sell cars will give that money to the people who sell cars, and the people who sell cars will give them a car. Right? That doesn't mean that the people who sold the car aren't making money off that car. And that doesn't mean that the person who's buying the car is paying too little or too much. It's an exchange. All right? It's fair because I wanted a car and you wanted money. And that's fair. If you wanted it to be equal, that means if I have $100 and everybody in the United States has $100, everybody gets a car worth $100.
Oh, say again, please.
Okay.
So everybody, say again, please.
Yes. So if everyone in the United States has $100,
Yes.
for it to be equal,
Okay.
okay, everybody's car has to be worth $100. I have 100, I give it to the person selling me a car. Now they have 100 and I get a car. It's equal. Both things are worth $100.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, I didn't get anything more than my $100 was worth, and the person who got the $100 didn't get anything from the car other than the $100 that it was worth. Nothing happened. We just exchanged a good, an equal good. Okay?
And that, like that in the companies, the government give the money. Or how
That's what I'm saying. Communism, okay, communism is a political construct. It is a philosophical construct. So if you look back, and this is way off course, right? I'm going to digress, everybody. Okay, so if you look at the foundations of communism in Marx and Engels, it is based on one thing. It is based on the ideal, I'm going to say, person. Okay? It's not based on a political construct. Their writings are philosophical. It's based on if everyone was perfectly altruistic, this is what would happen. Okay? I would always want to exchange everything equally for everything that I have. Okay? It's based on the perfect individual.
In the fairness, the example you give about the cars,
Uh-huh.
you know, the reality is not, it doesn't happen. The example probably could be, for example, a brother give money to the sister to buy something,
Sure.
it's not going to get the interest. Or some relatives going to give money to somebody.
Sure. And
Because the example from the car, normally it takes I give you the car, the dealer sells the car, but the point for the person get a loan, right, from some other institution.
sure, yeah.
So maybe
Yeah, there's complexities, and you can give a lot of examples, and that's one of the problems.
May apply. No, but
Yeah.
it may apply because the dealer, what he wants is to sell the car.
Sure,
And
the person wants a car.
the person wants a car,
Yeah.
but the dealer get some money, right?
Yes, I guess, hopefully.
They got the money they
Yeah.
want.
Yeah, so it's fair because what you said, I gave an example, you have another example, you may agree with my example, You may not agree with my example. That doesn't make me right and you wrong, or you right and me wrong. Fairness is subjective. Okay?
Okay.
So I may be, I'll give you a different example. I may be all hoot and hollering about having a nice green salad. And I may go somewhere and pay $15 for this most wonderful salad that I think is the most nourishing and fulfilling thing I've ever eaten in my life. And you may walk by and say, boy, $15, I could have gotten a hamburger, cheeseburger, fully loaded, and some fries. Okay? But to me, I would say, ew, I don't want a cheeseburger. I don't want greasy fries. I want a nice, healthy salad that crunches in my teeth. Okay, so for me, it's fair to give $15 for that salad. For another person, it'd be totally unfair for them to say, that's overcharging for a little bit of salad, which I don't like. I take the lettuce and tomatoes out of my hamburgers.
Okay.
You know, so it just depends on the person. Okay? So the point of this particular slide I did want to get to, because we were discussing it, is this bottom one, which is procedural justice, okay? Which is fairness, okay? It basically may modify distributive justice. And in practical terms, procedural justice is what we call now the law. What we call the law,
Oh, okay.
right?
Sorry.
From beyond its philosophical perspective, its ethical perspective, from its practical application, it's a legal term. Okay, so you ever heard of court proceedings?
Yeah.
That's what that is. And why am I bringing this up? Because there's an interplay that occurs between distributive and procedural. This is how much people like what's going on, what their government is doing. Okay? This down here is how much law there is. Okay? So government law, we'll find out, is reflected in a thing called regulation. Okay? What this says is when people, this is distributive justice up here, when people look at distributive justice, as long as people are satisfied, okay, they don't really care too much about procedural components. It's down here. Okay? When people become dissatisfied, the amount of dissatisfaction starts to rise, you start to get a lot more laws and regulations because they want to fix this. They want to fix the distributive component. So this is what people feel, okay, the distributive component, the sense of fairness, and this is what they do, the procedural component. This is how they adjust the sense of fairness by laws and regulation.
Machiavello idea, right?
It could be, yeah, it could be. I have never read The Prince, so I wouldn't know, but I would guess so. Okay, and they give an example there, but basically that's the point.
But the public or the clients who are in the green arrow,
Yeah.
so the person who helps to beat that, they have to go to the procedures.
Yes, but remember now, from at this point, we're seeing distributive as a social event. So this is the U.S. citizenship, the society, happy. Not the individual. But the individual ends up, yes, the court event may be an individual event, but it's an applicable component for society. So laws may have a foundation, especially in the United States, where we have a system called case law, may start off from an individual perspective, Roe versus Wade, right?
Dr. Martinez, I'm sorry. I don't understand procedural justice.
Yes.
What is?
It basically is laws. The more laws, the less satisfaction that there is with distributive justice, with the fairness, with the sense of well-being of the people, the more laws that they ask for.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
That's basically what this graph is. It's basically a chi-square graph in linear format. That's why I didn't want to explain it from the perspective of the math in it.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Great question. Thank you. All right. So I'm sorry with my pointer. I don't know if I can point to the right areas. So I'm kind of talking through it.
You move the mouse.
I was trying.
No,
but-
the people in the
Oh, they see it?
meeting, they will see.
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you for that.
Yes, we can see the huge ruler. We see the.
You see the mouse here?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
perfect. So
Thank
I'm going to talk about John Rawls, okay? And that's this gentleman up here, okay? John Rawls lived from 1921 to 2002. He was a social theorist, okay? And he forcefully expounded the perception of distributive justice being aligned or akin with social equality. Okay? And that there was such a thing, if there was inequality, as unfairness. And the only fair component could be inequality. So he made this statement here. Naturally, the naturally advantaged, that would be those who have more resources, the rich or the better educated or the well-positioned socially, are not to gain merely because they are more gifted. Okay? As a concept of gift, but only to cover the costs of training and educating and for using their endowments, those gifts, in ways that help the less fortunate as well. Okay? It sounds okay, okay, in a sense, right? It sounds okay in a sense. A lot of specific nuances there, but it is the driving social theory for modern social reform. And what today, it has changed through time, from there to today, is changed, and what we may consider liberalism. Okay? So liberalism wants distributive justice to redistribute from the gifted to the less fortunate. Okay? And it's based on modern thoughts in social justice of Mr. Rawls. Mr. Rawls had a counterpart, and again, it doesn't image as well here, by the name of Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick's perception of social justice was based on freedom of the individual. He would come from the perspective of the times of kings, times of emperors, where the individual was devalued. And the individual really did not have freedom. The individual was responsive to. Okay? Is that applicable? Happened in this country, right? This country was known for quite a period of time where there was slavery, right? Loss of individual freedom. The advantage we're giving to the poor? No, not at that time. So a totally morally and ethically skewed social construct, and that's why it went away. Okay? But we still have the component of inequality, and we still have the component of redistribution. So what's the fear? The fear is, as time goes, if you lose individual freedom, then you become a slave to equality. Okay? I'm posing those as perspectives, not espousing them as my ideological vent. Okay?
If you lose
So-
individual freedom, you lose.
You're becoming a slave to equality. Okay? And that I'm making that statement for a particular purpose, because remember where we're going. We're going to where we are now in the U.S. healthcare system and what the argument is. Okay? So there's a couple of little cartoons to lighten the mood. Okay? So I'm sorry, you can't read them. That's okay. All right, so this one here in the corner, can we turn these off? No, maybe not. I think it may project a little better. Okay.
It's not because of the light, it's because it's tiny.
It's tiny. Okay, I don't know if I can make it bigger. But.
Does that look better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
down here, this is the Nozick part. It says, thank you so much. How does it feel to live in a country with such a terrific healthcare system? And we have somebody hanging off a wall in chains, prisoner with a marker that says Cuba on it. Okay? So that would be Nozick's perspective. Okay? You have all healthcare given to you, but you have no rights and you have no freedom.
Doesn't apply to which one?
Huh? Yeah, this one applies to this one, Nozick.
Robert knows.
And this one over here applies more to John Rawls' perspective. And that one says, sorry, but your healthcare insurance won't cover a cesarean. However, it does cover the Heimlich maneuver. Okay? So he sees inequality built into systems. Modern distributive perspectives. This is bigger so you can see it. This is the Chief Justice, United States Supreme Court. This is a sick patient. Roberts, was responsible for upholding the current healthcare system laws and regulations. It's an umbrella covering the less fortunate, in this case, the uninsured, from the dreary components of his environment. Okay? Another component, patient in the OR, US healthcare system, physician, the surgeon, says, aha, we found the problem. Pulls out this big, ugly piece of big insurance out of the patient. Okay? So these are the components of distributive justice in modern times. This is how we've applied it. You see how far we've come from the time that I started with Aristotle and the thought process of everything should be good and fair to what we have now, which is basically opposing fields of thought. Okay? Church policy documents. Again, I apologize for the small print, but I would have ended up with many, 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 many more slides. So we have Rerum Novarum. I just wanted to bring that up because if you want to know the church and social justice, that's where it began. It was the encyclical promulgated by Pope Leo XIII in 1891. So since that time, the church has been involved in social justice issues. Okay? From the perspective of healthcare, the United States Conference of Bishops, has put out many documents regarding all sorts of different issues in healthcare. So the component is that the church has been involved in policy, in the healthcare component, and it is a fundamental component of who we are. Okay, as citizens of our created earth. Quickly now. Healthcare systems. So we hear a lot about socialized medicine, free market medicine, fee for service. They all come from basic constructs. The first model is the Beveridge model. It's basically Britain's National Health Service, and it's healthcare provided by the government. It is financed by the government. There are insurance companies, but they are non-for-profit. Okay? And the funding comes through government grant. The Bismarck model, which is an old German model, Germany was always a welfare state, okay? Basically is a bureaucratic model where the healthcare system is regulated from conception till burial. And it's what we would akin to more socialized medicine. There's a lot of regulations that guide the system. The national health insurance model is somewhat like ours because we're very insurance dependent, but the national health insurance one is basically that everyone is insured. There's some product or some structure that provides insurance. And then the out-of-pocket model was the traditional model for the existence of mankind, which is, again, the exchange, the fairness component. Okay, if I want to see you for a service, you will exchange that service for a monetary value that you've placed on it, and I will receive that service. Okay, that's basically a fee for service. Okay. The US healthcare system is basically all of those models. It has components of each and every one of them. So one of the goals that I wanted to express is the US healthcare system has a lot of different components. It changes, has a lot of different parts to it, and it's complicated. Okay? You take the 4 major healthcare systems in the world, and we have them all interacting with each other, with all sorts of different parameters that are judging whether it's working well, whether it's not working well, whether that distributive green line is high, or whether we need more legislation, laws to keep it righted. Okay, so that's where we are, and this is where we begin. All right, this is where I live. I'm a hospital administrator. I have to balance resources versus what we provide, okay? If you don't think that that's important, look in the newspapers and see how many hospital systems are going bankrupt. Okay? So what does that mean? I have a couple of different components. When we look at the individual, and we look at the US healthcare system, again, we're driven primarily at this point by insurance. And insurance is basically felt by the individual as what we call a premium. That means how much you pay for it, how much money you give. Okay. What you want to avoid is having a low premium with a lot of cost, because that's non-sustainable, or having high premiums with very low cost, because that's unfair for the patient paying. Okay? A lot of perspectives deal with insurance and whether insurance can be fair, insurance cannot be fair. Background, I worked for insurance prior to working for hospitals. Insurance is also very regulated. It's not that willy-nilly as far as I just want to make a lot of money, so I'm just going to charge a lot and I'm not going to give any services. I'm going to rip people off. There may be a component of that. That might be the fundamental mindset in a very simplistic way, because everybody wants in a capitalist system to make money. but that's not really what happens. Insurance rates actually have to do with what's called actuarial scales, which is they figure out how much diseases are costing you as an insurer, and they tell you how much you should charge minimally as far as a premium. Does that make sense? Well, it does in the sense because it makes you competitive. And that's really the key here. When you live in a competitive market, you have to adjust so you can stay competitive. So if I'm doing a lot high premiums but giving very low services, and somebody's got lower premiums than I do and they have much higher services, the tendency for the individual is to go buy the better product. Okay? So the actuarial ones control that and say, you spent a lot of money last year, your premiums are going higher. My competition didn't spend a lot of money last year, so their premiums can go lower. When I go sell my product, I'm at a disadvantage, right? That's really where the insurance lives. And there's a component, again, of what we call risk, because insurances live off of the premium. The premium is set at the beginning of the year. If you have 100 members paying $10, you have $1,000. At the end of the year, you started off with $1,000. Whatever you spent, you no longer have it. So if you spent $1,000, your profit was $0. If you spent $999, your profit was $1. If I spent $500, my profit is $500. That's the way insurances work. Okay, that's the U.S. healthcare system. Now, we layer on that patient outcomes. It costs money to treat people. Okay? So if I'm going to give you a Band-Aid, that Band-Aid came from somewhere. I had to buy it from CVS. So everything we do costs money. Do I have to give you a Band-Aid because you got a mosquito bite? No, probably not. I would think not. So what I have to do is give Band-Aids to the people who need it, and the people who don't need it, I don't really give Band-Aids to. In Rawls' perspective, what happens? Everybody gets a Band-Aid because everybody's equal. Okay, I want a Band-Aid, you get a Band-Aid. Okay, I can't do it. I don't have the resource because I have to balance the outcomes versus how much resource I have. Okay, and that's kind of where I live. Now, we're going to discuss a little bit about hospital delivery systems, and there's different perspectives. There's profit and non-for-profit. I've worked in both worlds. They're not that different. Okay, it's just a perspective.
Can we just go back a
Yeah,
little bit?
sure.
You said you can't give equally to everyone.
Yes.
So it's accepted right off that there's inequality, there will be and is determined to be inequality in care.
Yes.
Right off. No, there's just no ifs or buts about it.
Yes, from different perspectives. So if I have a patient with a heart attack that needs an angioplasty, I'm an interventional cardiologist, right?
But do all heart attacks have to have angioplasty?
No, that's the key, see? But all the ones that need intervention will get an intervention, regardless.
So they'll all get it equally.
They'll all get it equally. But not all heart attacks will get an intervention.
Okay, that's
And that's
harder to get.
Exactly, and that's the complexity of the system,
It
yes.
seems like the thing with Rawls is that he's not factoring in needs,
Yes,
you know, which basically then translates into the economic world, where you
Correct.
don't have the resources. You have the resources to fulfill the needs, but it's not efficient because then the people that don't need it,
Right.
but they need something else, are not going to get access to that.
right. And again, you are 100% correct. You're looking at it from a truly altruistic society where everyone loves their brother as they do themselves. So where does that exist? In the created world, we aspire to that. We work to that. We try to make ourselves better selves.
Right.
But will we ever succeed 100%? We have to have redemption.
We try.
Okay, so we try. But what I'm trying to say is that the healthcare system starts off with what we would think is a good moral foundation and theology, and evolves because of different perspectives within the society to something that tries to fulfill everyone's wants and needs. So this is not a good representation because the scale is never balanced and it's never the same. So sometimes I have a lot of money and less service. Sometimes I have a lot of service and less money. Sometimes it's always less money. It depends on where you are, what's going on, what the disease process may be. Okay. I could give a lot of examples. Unfortunately, each one of these, like I said at the very beginning, each one of these subjects is a subject unto itself. So I'm trying to get through an overall perspective just so you can understand where we are at this point.
Professor,
And yes.
excuse me, I want to go back there. Can you explain about how the insurance works?
Oh, the insurance. Okay.
I
All
understand.
right. So that's a different lecture. I don't know if that's coming up on your.
No, just please
No, sure. Yeah, don't look at the model. Okay, put a big X here. Okay. It's very easy. Insurance is regulated, like everything in healthcare. The regulators require three things from the insurer.
The insurer being the person who's buying the insurance.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. Thank you. From the insurance companies. Okay. The first thing that they require is that they remain whole and stable, because the regulators are trying to protect the insurer, the person purchasing the insurance. Okay. And since the healthcare system in the United States is insurance-based, it's very important that that's a appropriately commutative exchange. Okay. That's the first thing. So how do they accomplish that? They accomplish that by making sure that the insurers can cover the costs of the events.
They don't go bankrupt.
They don't go bankrupt. Because imagine if everybody was buying insurances and I'm the insurance company and I say, yes, here I am, give me all your money. Okay, I'm bankrupt, goodbye. I took all your money, you didn't get anything. Okay, that's not fair. Okay, and everybody could do that. So the regulators say, no. You want to be an insurer, you have to have a certain amount of money. Stable. So they do that by two things. Okay, they do that by what's called actuarial premium sets. Okay, so they have some very sophisticated, much more than me, and maybe some of you can do that, accountants and mathematicians and so on, that take all the data that insurance companies have and say, this is how much it costs you to run your business. So this is as much as you have to charge. Because if you can't charge as much, we can't let you be in business because you're going to go out of business. They project that you won't have enough money. On top of that, they say, you have to have a reserve. Okay, so they say, okay, even if you do this, we still want you to have enough money just in case we blew the math.
Disaster.
Right? Something untoward, like a hurricane that destroys a country. And you need a bunch of money. We can't let you go out of business there either, because people are relying on this to be able to live. That's the first thing. The second thing that's required of insurance is what's called compliance. Okay, so compliance is, again, regulated. What is it that you're selling? Right. A service. Which services? So you have to submit and say, okay, I'm going to sell services that cover doctor's office and emergency room visits and inpatient hospital care. Beautiful. That's what you say you're going to cover. That's what's on your certificate of coverage, is the term that they use. We're going to come by every once in a while and check that what you're selling is something that covers primary care services, I forgot what I said first, emergency room and inpatient care. Okay, so the regulations say, whatever you say you're selling, you have to sell. Okay? The third thing that is required now for insurances, and this is a newer component, is that they have a component of beneficence, that they're working towards making somebody better, preventing an episode of care, that they're doing something about how people feel. So that's why your insurance company may cover colonoscopies, mammographies, but they may cover vaccinations, because they want some type of thing keeping people healthy. Okay?
Prevention.
Huh?
Prevention.
It's kind of prevention. It's more keeping people healthy. It is prevention is a component of it. Okay? Because you can't really prevent somebody from getting colon cancer. But you can diagnose it early and maybe treat it and cure it, so they will remain healthy. So that's where we ended up with the health maintenance organizations. Okay, so we're going to scoot along, and
I have a question for
yes.
Dr. Martinez.
Yes.
How do they found the third part for insurance to have? How do the government, check that, or maybe do an audit in that insurance to see if they provide that service?
Yes. So insurance companies will submit data to the regulators on a periodic basis. And they'll have a certain series of reports that you will submit. From the perspective of the way insurances work, okay, there's a lot of, and we'll get to that maybe at the end, there's a lot of data by codes that actually describe what's going on with the patient. And when you submit your data, at the same time, the regulators have access to everyone's data, and they're matching your data with the data that they have. So if you said, I treated 5 heart attacks, or I paid for 5 heart attacks, and they have data that 10 of your patients ended up in the hospital with heart attacks, they're going to come back and say, well, it looks like you paid for 5, but it looks like 10 people had it. So why didn't you pay for these other 5? So that's the way they do it.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, sure. So just to go real quick, to do the math, I'm not actually going to go into the formulas. They're on the side. I don't know them. I don't really use them, but they're just there so for edification and for structure. Basically, this little square here at the end is where we really live, okay? Which is everything we do, we have to weigh the benefit versus the risk. And that's for every component of the healthcare system in the United States. Because in the end, there's a resource allocation. And there's also a fundamental component of delivering healthcare to the person. So I may make a lot of money by doing a procedure on a person, but if that person is dying from the procedures that I'm doing, it's not worth it for me to do those procedures, or it's not useful and it's not for the benefit of that person to have those procedures done. So there's a benefit and risk to everything that we do, and those are actually calculated, okay? And there's an example way at the end, or maybe here it is, it's coming up now, okay. There's a pill, okay? It's a pill for cardiac disease, primarily for patients that have weak hearts, okay? The standard medication, this one over here, is called enalapril. It's an old medication, generic. It's been around since I was around. So it's etched in stone where you find out how to do it. There's a newer medication called Entresto, which is very similar, but it's a mildly different molecule. And it costs about 10 times more than this one, okay? So when I have a patient with the same disease, a bad heart, a weak heart, I can give them enalapril or I can give them Entresto. The enalapril is cheaper. The Entresto is more expensive. Okay. So how am I going to give it to them? Okay, I'm going to decide based on the benefit and also based on the risk. So they have a lot of studies that they do on these patients before these medications are released. And these are, in this case, this is a comparative study. And over here, this is how many people did not do well on treatment, okay? And this is basically amount of time. And the green are the people who were on the enalapril.
Dr. Martinez,
Yes.
can you please use the mouse so we
Yes,
can
I am
see?
so sorry. Yes.
No problem.
I will use the, okay, so the enalapril is the green up here, the one at the top, the line at the top, and the Entresto is the line at the bottom, okay? And this up here is bad, okay? The higher it is, the worse it is. Okay, so if it's lower, that's good because that means less people are dying, having adverse events. The higher it is, it's bad because people are having more adverse events. So you can see that the green line over time is higher than the yellow line. So intuitively, you would say, okay, at this point, it looks like it's better for me to give Entresto than it is for me to give enalapril. Okay, because I have a decreased rate of bad things happening. Okay, now how much of a decreased rate, right? 20%. Okay, so 1 out of 5 of my patients will live longer if I give them this than if I don't, than if I give them something else. Okay, is it worth it? Well, that's what's called a relative risk reduction. So that means that compared to the green one, I have 20% less events going on. However, if we actually look at the absolute rate, that means percent to percent, right? The absolute rate of change, let's say I have 95 and now I'm at 90, the absolute rate percent change is 5%. Okay, in this case, I want to have a 20% relative risk reduction, 1 in 5, which sounds pretty good, but an absolute rate reduction of 3.2. Okay, so 3.2% of the patients will actually do better. So if I have 100 patients and I give them all this medication, the Entresto, which costs 10 times more, 3 of them will do better. Is it worth for the patient to pay so much more for a 3% benefit? I don't know. It may be worthwhile for one person. It may be absolutely prohibitive for another. So that's where our discussion comes, and that's where we become commutative. That's where the physician and the patient have to talk. If this was based on society, then I would say, absolutely not. I'm not going to spend 10 times more of my healthcare budget for a 3% improvement. Okay, you see how this works now? Okay. And then the number needed to treat is this thing NNT down here. That's a little bit more complicated formula, and that basically.
That one. That's my favorite.
Yeah, there you go.
Tells me much more about anything.
There you go. And you need 32 patients before you see a benefit. Okay, so basically 1 out of every 32 patients, you would see a benefit. Okay. So here we go. I'm going to have to move a little bit quicker, and I'm going to extend a little bit before we go on break, but I will give you a break in about 5 more minutes. But I do want to do at least this particular component of it. The U.S. healthcare system is primarily based on, again, insurance, but the fundamental components of what's changed are based on 2 things, okay? One is the Commerce Clause, right? And the Commerce Clause of the Constitution basically just states that the U.S. government has to keep things regular, okay? And that's where the word regulation comes from, okay? And when they're talking about regular is because the U.S. federal government is what keeps the regulation between the states. Okay, so if I have a medical license in Florida, I don't have it in Georgia, right? So I'm a doctor in Florida, I'm not in Georgia. That makes it a state issue, okay? However, if I work for the Veterans Hospital, which is a federal hospital in Florida, I, without a problem, can go to Georgia and work at the VA hospital in Georgia. Because for the federal government, That's hunky-dory. Okay, so that's really and that Commerce Clause is what creates, this is old now, this is whatever, well, from the Constitution. That's what creates the ability for the federal government to create regulations, which is what creates now the modern healthcare system that we have. Okay, from there, we evolved to the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare. Because if it wasn't for that Commerce Clause, it would be up to the states what happens.
Well, so that's why there's this whole big controversy going on between federal government versus.
There's the states, right?
I couldn't understand why there was a controversy.
Exactly, and that's very key to the Medicaid program. Medicare, I'm jumping ahead just in case I don't get to the slides. Medicare is a federal program. Medicaid is a state program. Okay, so some people say, okay, Medicaid should be run by the federal government. And some people say, no, Medicaid should be run by the states. All right. It's true, it's set up for the states, but who gives you the money? The federal government. So there we go to the exchange. All right, what's fair? Well, if I'm giving you the money, I got to tell you what to do with it. You can't just, I won't give it to you otherwise.
Sorry, Dr. Martinez. Medicare is run from?
Medicare is federal. That means from the federal government, from Washington. Medicaid, which was an indigent care program or a safety net program, is run by the states. So when you go from one state to another,
okay,
your Medicaid benefits may change.
Oh, okay.
Huh?
Yes, thank you.
I'm sorry.
The federal government regulates Medicare and the
States
state regulates
Medicaid. So if I have Medicaid in the state of Florida, I don't have Medicaid, in California. Okay? If I have Medicare in the state of Florida, I have Medicare in California. Because it's regulated, it's regular by the federal government. Everything is the same. This has to do with transporting cotton. Okay, that's where this comes from. Okay. Where are our protections? The First Amendment, okay, free exercise of religion. The Fourth Amendment, privacy, sounds good, created a big problem. 14th Amendment, equal protection. Discussing that now, okay? Quick bullets. First Amendment, free exercise of religion. Key issue, abortion. Okay? Contraception. Sterilization. I mean, the doctor can go through a lot of them. But from this perspective, from my faith, I don't want to participate. Okay? And I feel I'm protected under the First Amendment. Not everyone does. 14th Amendment. Okay? Let's see. Privacy. It doesn't show up here.
Yeah,
there it is. Okay, here it is. Okay. Privacy. That's really Roe versus Wade. That's where it's funded. Roe versus Wade is not you can have an abortion or you can't have an abortion. Roe versus Wade is it's a protection of privacy of the woman to make her own choice. Nobody can interfere. You can't say you can't have one because that means you know. So if you know, that exchange was no longer private. 14th Amendment protects her under privacy. These are all judges, okay? Equal protection under the law. Everyone's egalitarian. Everybody's the same, right? Is the healthcare system a legal system in the United States? Some people say yes, some people say no. It's regulated, regulation and law, right? We see go together, right? It's that component of justice in the United States. Justice is law. Equal protection. I have healthcare. I don't. I have the right to healthcare. So it's a right, okay? So the key is it a right or not? That's really all this is about. Should everyone have healthcare? If it's a right, it's protected under the 14th Amendment. So the argument is whether it's a right or not. Whether it's a right or not is a political and philosophical argument.
But if
Okay.
it's not a right,
If it's not a right, then the 14th Amendment has nothing to do with it and everybody's on their own. Okay, that's where we are now. Okay? A bathroom for every bottle. Okay? So, equal protection. Today I want to use the women's bathroom. Okay? Tomorrow I want to use the men's bathroom. Tomorrow I want my own bathroom. Because I have to have the same rights as everybody else. Why should you be able to go to the women's bathroom and me, under the 14th Amendment, not be able to? Okay. Okay, that's where the arguments are. Okay, so these currently are the drivers for the arguments in the US healthcare system case law. There is no, it is not a Napoleonic system where the laws are pre-written and you follow the laws. These are case laws. So the one that gets precedent in the judicial system is the ruling law of the country. Okay, so whoever makes it to the Supreme Court first and gets their decision, that's the law. Okay, until somebody else comes along and can have another case which trumps that law. Okay, that's the US healthcare system's foundation. Complicated.
But this is from what year? 1989?
No. This is the Constitution. Constitutional amendments. The first one was in 1789. The second one, I don't know if I have it written out here.
1868.
Yeah, and this one's 1868. Yeah, the amendments came on. That's the other component of this. People think that the U.S. Constitution was all written at one time and the amendments were all, they've come on depending on what's going on. They have a reason why they were put there, but that's not the reason that we apply them now. Because a lot of the things that created these, this one, the Commerce Clause, had to do with Indian tribes. We don't, that's not a problem.
That's coming from the fourth power, 1789.
Right. I think so. I don't.
Because it would be before the first 10.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
at that time,
Very good.
it was different, the society.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's it didn't evolve until they use this part. For example, when they want to put right about equal or
Right.
rights, it didn't work now because they're coming out like I don't have anything about homosexual. They're coming out.
Sure.
They want to use that.
Sure. Yes. And now it's up to a judge or a group of judges throughout, and I'm not going to get to the legal system because that's a whole other conundrum, to make decisions based on where their legal foundations are. Okay? And how they interpret this is variable. Okay? So it depends what the judge says. Okay? So, 1 minute on the U.S. healthcare system. I just want to make 3 quick points. Okay, the U.S. healthcare system prior to the 1900s was just a free-for-all. So if you were a dentist in a Western town, that doesn't mean that you had any experience as a dentist. All that means is that you were able to hold somebody down and pull a tooth really hard. Okay, so it was a free-for-all. After the 19th century. 19th century, yeah. People started to see that remember that first thing with the snake, organizing medicine was a good thing. That's because of the Civil War, where there was a lot of healthcare needs in a short period of time, and you had to be able to handle that, and you couldn't do it willy-nilly, right? The Army is very structured. They said, we need this, and we need a hospital, and we need doctors, and the doctors do this, and when you have this, you go there, and they structured it. So that's the foundations of structure in the United States. In the 1900s, basically, healthcare systems started to evolve. So you got socialized medicine in Europe. In the 1930s and 1950s, US healthcare systems started to evolve. It was no longer just the interchange. It was no longer commutative. It started to become more distributed because the government started to get involved. Okay? That was in the 30s. And in the 60s, we have all the civil rights components. People started asking for more health care. The United States started seeing things as rights. In the 1970s, we had different programs that started to be evolved where the federal government started to provide care. That's where we get the 60s, we got the Medicare and Medicaid program, the 70s.
I remember that the day that was passed.
Okay, there you go. The AMA was, amazingly enough, totally against it back then. Okay, now they're all in with government healthcare. In the 1970s, we actually got the HMOs and we got disability coverages. In the 1900s, we got the ERISA, which is what we commonly call COBRA. I don't know if that's used much anymore. But basically, when you left your job and went to another one, you could still buy your old insurance for a while. Okay. In the 1990s, then we started to get into controlling regulations. Okay, and that's the HIPAA, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then in the later 1990s and the Bush era, we started funding healthcare. Bush funded a lot of healthcare. Actually, the federal government was giving money, and that's the way they wanted healthcare to be performed. He created what's called the drug benefit. Okay, so what happens is you get to give medications from the federal government. The federal government will pay for part of your medications. Okay, and we'll get into that. We're going to talk about presidential health care. We're running short on time. If you could take, instead of a 10-minute break, if you would be kind and take a 5-minute break and then do whatever it is you need to do. And then I promise it'll get a little bit more exciting, and then at the end of the boring again. Thank you so much.
Actually, terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez.
Yes, yes. I don't want to clock you out. What do you need, Larda?
No, I just say thank you. It's very interesting.
Okay. We're good. Okay.
No. It's not enough. More handsome.
So we're live and recording. All right. So we've gotten to this point through the regulatory history, and I just want to give you a perspective. Oh, don't worry. So I just want to give you a perspective from the presidents on how these things evolved and why presidential intervention is somewhat key in the healthcare system.
Is so much needed?
It is in the U.S. component from, let's see if we can get this to go. Let's see. From the bully pulpit. Okay, so Theodore Roosevelt, I'm going to go quickly through these slides because they're more or less a review, basically championed federal public health efforts. So he was one of the strong champions and advocates and approver of legislation, advocate of legislation for public health systems. He also proposed the Pure Food and Drug Act, which eventually became the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. Franklin Roosevelt was the president during the Depression. He was also during that period of time, formed during that period of time after Rawls, when the component of distributive justice was very, very much in vogue. He proposed several advancements in healthcare, but the fundamental one, which we deal with now, is that healthcare is a right. He said it should be incorporated into the Bill of Rights. There were several social programs that passed, but he was not really able to impact a great deal on healthcare, except for the component of Social Security. which at that point, given that medicine was an exchange, it was fee for service, at least it gave the elderly an opportunity to be, if they were not funded or they were unemployed, to be able to pay for required healthcare. Now, healthcare back in the 40s wasn't the be all to end all.
So he was the one that started Social Security?
He started Social Security. Or the component of it. I'm not sure what the actual bill was called. Harry S. Truman started to focus on disease processes, focusing on mental health and women and babies. He advocated strongly the insurance products as a way of regulating healthcare. And from that point on, insurance started to become the standard by which people gained access to healthcare. That system was very consistent then for the next 30, 40 years. Dwight Eisenhower was very structured, being a military person, and he developed departments to deal with this, to study it, to regulate it, to control it, to advise. He called that the Department of Health, which now is called Health and Human Services. It was called Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Okay? So it was basically the social justice department of the federal government. So now you see how the government has come from public health to structuring access to now a department that regulates healthcare in the United States, with a fundamental base for access being insurance. JFK was the first proponent for a very distributive perspective on healthcare. He almost got to the point where he was going to create a universal healthcare system, but it ultimately failed until Lyndon B. Johnson then took over, and he added to the Social Security Act the components of Medicare and Medicaid. At that point, the focus was primarily on those in need. So it was poor elderly and the socially, economically poor. Okay? Richard Nixon's focus was a great deal on the insurance component of it. His approach was the more insurance, the better, because if more people were able to get insurance, then more access to healthcare would ensue. So he was very much based on insurance and the insurance products, and he created HMOs, okay, health maintenance organizations, with the thought process that if people remained healthy, it would cost less money to treat them. If it would cost less money to treat them, the insurance premiums would be lower, more people would be able to afford insurance, and there would be more people who had access to insurance. That was the thought process. Now, when we think today of insurance companies, we're actually thinking of HMOs. There's no insurance companies anymore. So way back in the day, my dad, who was a physician, he used to bill Travelers. So Travelers is gone. They're no longer a health insurance. They're still around as an insurance company, but they're no longer a health insurance company. And that was just, you would buy your premium, you'd have Travelers insurance, you would bill Travelers, and that was where the reimbursement came from. All of those companies have now morphed into HMO products. Okay, so HMOs are basically the insurance product that you live in. Gerald Ford was going towards insurance regulation. So he wanted to have more access from insurance, control of premiums, but we went into a recession and he said, nothing. I'm not going to do anything because it's going to cost money and the economy is going to implode. That's where we get this balancing.
He wanted Medicare for everyone?
He wanted, yes, basically he wanted to expand Medicaid, Medicare. He wanted to create a single fund. Yeah, for the federal government. And he would just give it all out and everybody would just have, everyone in essence would be covered in one way or another, Medicaid, Medicare, or insured. And then everybody would have access.
Is it really a single payer or?
It's kind of a single payer because the federal government would just give you money.
Okay.
At that point, we didn't have that concept yet because it was all single payer to an entity. There was a private entity, but now the line between private entity and federal government is terribly blurred. Basically, you are a contractor of the government. Jimmy Carter focused a little bit on infant care. There was a lot of changes in the healthcare industry at that point because of evolution in healthcare methods, technologies, and clinical care. So we were reaching a zenith in the level of care that we were providing. That's when the U.S. healthcare system was the gold standard, right? But it was very expensive. Access was difficult. There was a lot of issues with cost. And he was focused on making sure that everybody who worked had insurance. Okay, so that's where the idea is that when you went and you got a job, you got a health insurance policy. Okay, at that point, most of the time you didn't have to pay into it. The reward was that it was federally tax deductible. Okay. So it was a backwards way of the federal government paying for it. Ronald Reagan was trying to fix the budget at the same time trying to stimulate the economy. His focus was primarily on expenditure, and I'll leave it at that. It was complicated. There was a bunch of tax bills and cuts and Medicare change or Medicare access change from age 63 to age 67, depending on when you were born. Deductibles changed. It was more monetary, but it was basically based on budgetary issues, not so much on the components of moral, ethical access or distributive or commutative components. George Bush wanted to stabilize the system, but he wanted to standardize it from the perspective of what the risk of the individual would be. His perspective was that if you made it affordable, but you had people give a contribution, the system would be able to control itself. So he was a very hands-off federal government type person, but at the same time, he understood the need for universal health care, or for universal access, I should say. Bill Clinton had a lot of the ideas of universal access, how they would work, how he could incorporate it into federal government systems, how they could be monitored, how we could improve. The technology data sets did not accompany that. The operational components of doing that was very sophisticated, so he put his wife in charge of it, and they just basically could not come up with a way to fill a glass with water. Okay, so that whole thing kind of became a debacle, and there was really very little impact except for philosophically on where the United States should go. George Bush, again, his main contribution was that he spent money. He took the federal budget and poured a lot of different federal programs into research. He created a lot of funding for HIV/AIDS, which was an issue back then. He created a very expensive program which has impacted how we practice medicine, pharmaceutical delivery in this country since that time. And it's going the way everybody thought it was going to go. It was not a good idea. So it made everything really expensive because the federal government subsidizes it. Okay, and whenever the federal government subsidizes, every year you want more money. So every year you want more money, you ask for more money, you get more money, and then it's a vicious cycle because there's no ceiling as to where you have to stop. Okay, so we're getting now to where we are today from time past, right? So Barack Obama created the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Okay. It has, as its standard, those words. Patient protection means care and access, okay? Being able to protect the patient-centered, from all of the morass of not being able to have health care. Okay? Affordable care was supposed to be that using that program, our healthcare budget resources would decrease. Okay? The utilization of our healthcare budget resources would decrease. In other words, we would spend less money and get better healthcare. Right? It didn't work, but it's what we have. Donald Trump, who is our current president, says no. I want to get rid of that, and I want to do something else. We haven't gotten rid of it, and we haven't done something else. So that's what I'm saying. We are still living under Obamacare. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay? So, U.S. healthcare system. I don't want to go through all these because it's a lot of stuff. I want to confuse you. I want to irritate you. I want you to not be able to recite this ever again in your whole life, but this is also what's in my head. Okay? So what are these? All right? This is how we deliver healthcare. Okay? All these bullets are how we deliver healthcare, where you go to have somebody treat whatever you have. And this is just a short list. So we have federal hospitals. There's pure federal hospitals, none in Florida. But examples are active military hospitals, like Bethesda for the Navy, or the VA Medical Center system. Okay, those are federally funded hospitals, federally run facilities. There are state hospitals, none in Florida. Okay. There used to be one in Lantana. That was the last one for tuberculosis patients. That's been done away with. That's just basically controlled by the Florida Department of Health. Okay? The only state hospitals per se are the ones that are affiliated with state universities. So if you have Shands is a hospital affiliated with Gainesville University of Florida. So that would be a state hospital because it's basically run by state employees. Okay. Local government county hospitals, if you live in Broward General, if you live in Miami-Dade, it's Jackson Memorial Hospital, that's the model. Community hospitals, that's a standard one that's in your neighborhood. They could be small. There's one in the Keys. I forgot if it's, I always confuse them, if it's Fisherman's or, I think it has 30 beds.
Fisherman's, Mariners.
Yeah. So Fisherman's is really cute and small. And then you have, you know, some behemoth like a JFK Medical Center up in Boynton Beach, which has 500 beds. Those are community hospitals. So there's quite a range, quite a variety of different services. There's rural, like Mariners, or the ones that may service outlying areas in Indian reservations in other states and so on, or in country areas. These are usually smaller hospitals, and they could come from any one of these other resources. They could be federal, they could be state, but they're basically, it's a setting of a hospital. And then there's metropolitan urban hospitals, which is the big city hospitals, which are usually more dynamic. Critical access hospitals is actually a designation dependent on the type of patients that you treat. If you have a high level of indigent or unfunded patients, disproportionately disadvantaged patients, then you get to have a critical health hospital designation. The funding is different. You get paid more by grants. There's types of hospitals. There's for-profit and non-for-profit hospitals. So I work for a hospital corporation, which is for-profit. That corporation trades on the stock exchange. We make money. And then there's non-for-profit, such as down here, Baptist Hospital. That's a non-for-profit system that makes a lot more money than most of the for-profit hospitals. But the key for the nonprofit is that they reinvest either in themselves and definitely now into the community by regulation. Okay, there is what we call trauma centers, and those are designations for acute levels of of injury care, very key in Houston, in Nevada. Recently, there's a level 2, there's a different level. There was a level 2 trauma hospital, which took, I think, about 200 and something critically wounded patients. Okay, so that's the type of care. We have Ryder Trauma down here, Broward General up in Broward. Freestanding emergency rooms, that's a newer caveat. Those are usually state-based. So now you can have an emergency room with all the emergency room type of care, acute care, but not to the level where you need to have an inpatient level of service, and they could be just in the corner. So there's one from Iventura. I think HCA is opening one somewhere in Doral, and Baptist has a couple here and there. It's a delivery model. There's a thing called urgent care centers, which have been around for quite a while, and that basically is a level below an emergency room. It's for acute problems that you would access your doctor for, but the doctor's office is closed or you don't want to go there, so you go to this place and they treat you, but it's not because you're having a heart attack. So it's a lower level of care. Those are the classic CVS Minute Clinics or Target, whatever. Ambulatory surgical centers are places where you can go have procedures done, but they're usually within 1 day, sometimes 2 days. Those are regulated. Okay, how many days you can stay there. If the surgery requires more than a certain number of days, you can't have the procedure done there. Once you're out of the acute care setting, then you may go into more chronic care setting, and there's skilled nursing facilities, which are nursing homes. There's rehabilitation facilities, which are for physical therapy. These are more for structural components or for functional components. So people who break their hips would more than likely want to recover and walk again, so you would send them to a rehab as opposed to a skilled nursing facility. A skilled nursing facility may go there to get some more medications, and a rehab, you have to have some level of activity for functional recuperation. A long-term acute care is basically, if you think of the ICU, the intensive care units in the hospital, but you're gonna stay there for 30 days. So you're very sick for a really long time. And so instead of staying in the hospital all that time, it doesn't always happen, but people stay in the hospital for a long, long time. But the idea is that you would leave the intensive care unit, the acute intensive care unit, once you're stabilized, but you still need a lot of treatment to go to the long-term acute cares. Then there's home health care companies that basically deliver levels of care which can be provided at home, and they use in consort what's called durable medical equipment companies, which is the ones that bring maybe the bed, the oxygen, the bedside commode, all that type of stuff. And then finally, there's hospice care settings, which basically is palliative and end-of-life care. Now, there is also one more designation, I didn't put it here, which is a variant in the U.S. healthcare system, which is behavioral health services. Behavioral health services are separated from all other health services in the way that the U.S. healthcare system is constructed. So a behavioral health hospital is different, although they may be in the same place, different than the inpatient acute care hospital. A psychiatric patient is coded and billed differently than a patient who comes in with a pneumonia. Okay, they see those two as different types of patients. Okay.
Doesn't, can I go back a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
When it comes to hospice care,
Yeah.
Isn't hospice now more expanded than just palliative terminal care?
It's
Usually that's end of life.
expanded
short-term.
into those two. So palliative, I should have put a little line. Palliative and terminal care are two different components. So palliative is basically making you feel comfortable. Terminal care is just helping you feel comfortable during a shorter expected period of time until you succumb to whatever it is that's making you ill.
Excuse me, you mentioned
Yeah.
behavioral problems. So they're
Yeah, I didn't put it there because it's actually a little bit of a conundrum, and it's not part of the Affordable Care Act. That's where I want to kind of get to. but it's almost a healthcare system onto itself. Okay, so if you have health insurance, okay, and you become schizophrenic, maybe that won't happen, but just using that as an example, your healthcare insurance won't cover the schizophrenic. You have to have some type of coverage for behavioral health.
I just talking about the history about United States and the healthcare.
Yeah.
About a book and reading about patients with mental illness.
Yes.
And then the book was say about and I don't know what exactly year. It was before mental institutions. And
right.
after they took all these patients
Sure.
and given discharge, just
Right.
like and now
Right.
this is the actually homeless.
Right. Yeah. And again, there's all sorts of things. Remember that stuff that we talked about, equal rights and privacy and so on. All of these things play into the healthcare system. So you could before take a mentally unstable patient or person who was saying, I'm going to go up to the top of a hotel and shoot into a crowd, and stick them in a mental institution and say, no, you're going to be here until you're saying I'm going to raise roses. Okay? Can't do that now because that's a violation of their civil rights. Okay? So for you to do that, you can do it at a certain extent. I didn't get into this whole thing. You have to do a thing called a Baker Act. Okay? And that's a particular law which defines an acute event where you're sick and you have to have treatment, but you're not able to psychologically function. So they can impose that treatment because you are, one, a danger to yourself, or you're a danger to others. But that's a very constructed way. So you can't be Baker active for a month. You can be Baker active for a couple of days, and then after a while, then you have to reassess it and so on. It's not like it used to be where you're just chronically ill.
I'm talking about there was some part of the history, probably.
Sure, yeah.
Mental institutions
Right,
exist,
right.
And what government?
Right.
I don't know, probably, I don't know, it has to be more deep. They just take the mental institutions,
Yeah.
and now they say, oh no, you are okay because you say at this moment, they know,
Right.
they give you discharge,
Right.
and now we can see a lot of people
Right.
around.
Yeah, those used to be called chronic mental health wards.
Right.
So,
So, but what government?
because of a civil rights component and the legal components of it, they decided that they weren't going to do that anymore.
Question, Dr. Martinez.
Yes, Claudia.
Does the government cover for the behavioral health?
Does the government cover? Yes, it does, under a separate billing component, but yes, it does.
Okay.
So who pays? All right, so there's a bunch of different ways that people bill and get paid depending on the setting, and they have different monikers, but the most standard way is fee for service, which just means I do something for you and you pay me, right? I bake you a cake and you give me $20, I give you the cake. Prospective payment system, which is what's very common now, is based on what's called episodic care. So if you have a diagnosis, you have pneumonia, I'm going to give you this much money for treating the pneumonia. And whether you spend it or not, that's up to you, but that's how much as I pay for pneumonias. Okay, as opposed to fee for service, which is I charge you for everything. Okay, if I treat you for 20 days, I charge you for 20 days. And if I do 20 different things, I charge you for 20 different things. In the prospective payment system, they're going to give me a lump sum. If I treat you in 3 days or if I treat you in 100 days, that's up to me. I'm going to get the lump sum. Okay, because they're saying this is what this costs and this is what we pay. That was modeled by Medicare, and now it's very pervasive in almost all components of reimbursement. Behavioral health benefits, as we were talking, are separate from the general health coverage, so you may need different policies if you're looking for an insurance component or different benefits depending on where you're looking. Commercial is basically the individual purchase. So that's me, and I go to an insurance company and I say, how much will you charge me for my health insurance? They say, you know, $100 a month, and I send them $100 a month, and I have insurance. That's commercial insurance. It's a trade. HMOs, again, you pay a fixed fee, okay, or you assign your benefits to them. So I'm in a health maintenance organization. Every month I pay $500, and they got to do everything for me. Okay, they don't really, but that's what they got to do. Preferred provider organizations are networks which get together and offer the service, because together they're able to coordinate care and make it cheaper, so they're able to offer a lower price. Points of service are facilities that offer that. So PPO, preferred provider organization, may be made up of a group of doctors. Point of service may be made up of a group of hospitals. Okay, that's the difference. An ACO, and it's an affordable care organization, is an experiment. And basically, it's a mix of PPOs and POSs, facilities and physicians or providers, labs, whoever, that get together and create a product, and then you assign your benefits to them, and it's up to them to manage it and either spend it or not spend it. Okay, so they have to be innovative. Okay, and it actually is a demonstration project based on Obamacare. There's different designations which create different payments. So depending on what you have and whether you meet criterias, you're either what's called inpatient, which means in the acute care facility, and that's how you are reimbursed. You are outpatient, which means you may be in the facility, but your status is not meeting the level to be an inpatient, or you may be observation. So observation means that they're looking at you to see what's going to happen to you. You haven't been designated inpatient or outpatient yet. Okay? Usually in observation, the issue is that there's shared responsibility. So the patient has a cost share along with the insurer, the payer. Okay, that tends to be the one that hurts people the most. Okay, now one thing could be in any particular way. So I could have a patient with an acute appendicitis. Okay, the acute appendicitis could start out as an observation. You say, well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let me figure it out. Let's see if this is really bad or not. Okay, so then all of a sudden I decide, oh, you know what? I have to bring this patient in as an inpatient because the appendix is perforated. It's an abscess. It's going to take a lot of resources to treat them. Or I could say, you know what? I shouldn't have used that, but I could have used acute cholecystitis. I'm going to send you home, and you come back in a week, and we'll take a look at it.
Antibiotics and come back in a week.
Exactly, and then we may consider doing it at that point when things have cooled down. So you can change, and depending on what your status is, the reimbursement will be different. So inpatient care requires more resources, it's paid more. Outpatient care requires less resources, so it's paid less. So that's where the ambulatory surgical centers come in, because a lot of stuff that used to be inpatient now is becoming outpatient. And the reason it's becoming outpatient is because they have to pay less for it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Regulations 42 CFR, Congressional Federal Regulation number 42. This is where healthcare lives.
Dr. Martinez.
Yes.
No, what is the rule? The 2-night rule, so the 3
2 midnight rule applies to observation.
Oh, okay.
To this one here. And what that is Medicare considers that if you stay in the hospital for whatever condition, more than 2 midnights, you're more than likely have an inpatient condition. If you stay less than 2 midnights, it could very well be that you have an observation or outpatient condition and you shouldn't have been admitted. If you stay less than 1 day, they will review it because they think you should not have been placed in an inpatient status. So that's what the 2 midnight rule is.
That's for insurance, right?
It's a federal government. It's not really, insurances use it also because the insurances basically do everything that the federal government does. So it's a Medicare regulation, but insurances will adopt it because they're allowed. The federal government allows the insurances to do everything that they do. And it's a way of holding down costs or holding down how much they pay. So the insurance will, yeah, I like that idea too, so I'm going to do it. The patient pays more, right? Because if I'm an inpatient, I'm going to be covered by the DRG and maybe I have a deductible. Okay. If I'm observation, I'm going to pay for a % of my bill. Okay. So if I racked up a bill of $20,000 in those 2 days, I'm going to pay 10.
Bro, this is the
Okay.
one where they say that a woman go to the Marina Bird and then it's only 2 days and then you have to leave at the third day, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then when it's a C-section, like a 3 or 4 days, and they can't.
Yeah. I don't know. I would have to look them up. I have a list of every single thing that happens, but
That's
yeah.
not from the insurance, that's coming from the government.
Yes. Yes. They have a list. They give us lists of outpatient procedures, inpatient procedures. The 2-minute rule is a government regulation, and it's monitored and so on. So 42 CFR is government regulations that everything builds from there. It's a very long law. It's every day. If when I worked with the insurance companies, every day I would get a new update or what they used to call proposed amendment to the 42 CFR. So it's a constantly changing regulation. Stark laws basically hamstrung the physicians. The Stark laws was the anti-kickback statutes and basically made the physicians not able to do anything that would make it look like they were referring to themselves. Okay, so a physician used to be able to own whatever, an MRI. And then you have a patient that you thought needed an MRI, you would send them to your MRI and then they would bill them. Stark says no. If you own an MRI, you're sending patients to that MRI is because you want to get money from the MRI. Yeah.
What if I operate in an outpatient facility and I'm one of the investors in creating the outpatient?
Yeah, so you have to have that structured in what's called safe harbors within the Stark law. And I'm not a healthcare attorney, but if you're going to do that, get yourself one because there's a slide there that's pretty scary that's coming up. Okay, so CLIA is basically the certification of lab regulation, which makes sure that the people who are drawing your blood are drawing it right and that they're processing your blood okay and they're not mixing up people's urine samples and all that. HITECH was basically a rule for encouraging people to adopt more electronic healthcare systems. But actually, there's a little hidden regulation in there, which says that if you have a vendor, so I have a company, a hospital, and I purchase a computer system from the vendor, that vendor has to be certified by me that they're going to meet all the federal regulations that I'm subjected to. Okay.
You the hospital.
The hospital, I mean the doctor, whatever it is, the ambulatory surgical center. So that's a little hidden thing. Okay, so every time you go sign a contract with a healthcare provider that's purchasing something, they're going to put a rider in there saying that you're going to do everything that you're supposed to do according to Medicare regulations and that you're not in violation and anywhere will be violation or in the future now or in the past of any regulation, and if you are in regulation violation, you got to let us know. And there's a bunch of legalese that goes along with this because now you are responsible for everyone who's in your shop. Okay, that was supposed to be so you would buy an EHR. Okay, so that's why regulations work. So HIPAA, which is the Portable Care Act, basically was your ability to transport your healthcare from Florida to Texas. Okay, that was okay, and it made the regulations easier, but it didn't because that's where privacy comes in. Okay, so in there's a thing saying that nobody can know anything about what you're doing, and if you tell anybody, there's horrendous amounts of penalties, and so that HIPAA ties to HITECH, right? So if I bought an electronic medical record or a photocopier, I buy a photocopier, right? And I copy your chart and I leave a couple of pages on the photocopier, okay? I'm in trouble because I'm releasing your healthcare information to whoever comes by, grabs that copy, and I got a bunch of penalties, right? So these photocopiers in the hospital are little FBIs. You log in, they tell you how many copies you made, who you made the copy, where you got the fax, where you sent the fax, how many papers came out, who was it that asked for the papers, everything. So they find out, okay, because of regulations, okay? And all that was supposed to mean was that I can take my medical records from the state of Florida and take it over to Georgia and I'd be okay. I can still get the same care, okay? That's how these work. Okay, you have a comment.
I was saying the ACA was 100 pages on Friday.
Oh, yeah.
And the Monday returning to business, it was 2,000.
Yeah, so I got about 2,000 more slides to go down. Okay, yeah, that's the way it works. But yeah, these are living documents, by the way, if anybody understands that concept. Okay, so Impala is a real big deal. Okay, so I'm sure the doctor knows a lot about this. The purpose of Impala, and I gave you this little healthcare jargon thing, so you can look these things all up. I gave it to Father Shofi, and he was supposed to send it to you. Okay, because I can't remember them. That's why. It's just so many of them at this point. But I wanted to, because it's very. Let me see if it's here, because it's very descriptive. Okay, well, it's not in here. How about that? Okay, but it's basically the Emergency Medical Transportation Labor Act. Okay, so what it was based on was you didn't want a pregnant woman that was not insured who ended up in your emergency room getting picked up from your private, beautiful, for-profit hospital and put in a cab and sent to Jackson. Okay, you didn't want that happening.
It was very common.
Okay, because you were basically pushing patients out inappropriately because that patient could die or the baby could die or all sorts of complications could occur. And the only reason you were doing it was because they didn't have insurance and you didn't want to take the cost. So you say, oh, no, you're okay, go. Okay, that was what that act was about. Okay, what it's evolved to is a very complicated series of interactions between healthcare providers. So now, that was a labor act, but now it applies to everybody who comes into the emergency room. So that idea that everybody says, if you're sick, there's universal coverage because you can go to any emergency room and get treated for whatever you have, that's where that comes from. Because it's very hard to kick you out of the emergency room once you're there. Now, that doesn't mean you get admitted, but they got to treat you, okay? Unless you really, really, really can't treat the patient. So if I have a patient that walks into the emergency room with his arm hanging off his shoulder, right? I really don't have an ortho hand surgeon. I don't have an ortho hand trauma surgeon in my emergency room. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna call the other hospital and say, you got ortho hand, I got a person with an arm hanging off his body. He's on his way.
Well, you have to accept him first.
Ah, that's the key. No, you don't.
Oh, no?
No.
Oh.
That other facility cannot deny the transfer, or else they are in violation of EMTALA because they have the service. They're a trauma center. I don't.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay, so they got to say, okay, send them over, and then boom, there they go. Now, if I have an ortho hand and the person says, yeah, you know what, I really had a lot to drink last night, I don't want to come in. So give me a break, buddy. And I say, okay, I understand, and I'll send it over down the street. Oh, I'm in trouble. Okay, what are the penalties? Okay, the penalty is $75,000 per case. $75,000. Yes.
You know, I was discussing this in Tala the
Yeah.
other day, that was taking a course,
Mm-hmm.
and then she's risk management,
Yeah.
and I told her the cases happen,
Mm-hmm.
and she said that what the hospitals are doing, the hospital,
Yeah.
is okay, this patient doesn't have any more insurance, anything, it's not
Uh,
so they move them from the hospital to other institutions.
yeah, that's an EMTALA violation.
Yeah, they do that, but they say it was the case they leave a patient in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
In front of the hospital.
Yeah.
And you can say, and I asking her about that. I said, so how it happened? So how
Mhm.
it happened? They said, well, if they leave the patient there, but there is nobody receiving, that's not the fault of the hospital who is there. There has to be somebody who say and sign
Yeah.
papers
Right.
in order to receive
Mhm.
the transfer patient and other, like for example, talking about Mercy Hospital.
Yeah.
Mercy Hospital has one patient and
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Right.
leave the patient with a wheelchair and from
Right.
some other hospital.
Yeah, they can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two components to that. First, this really applies, and EMTALA, the first letter E is for emergencies. This only applies to emergency rooms. There's not really inpatient EMTALA. Okay. And the quirk is that labor wards are very different than the standard inpatient ward, because for you to be in the labor ward, you're considered to be in an emergency room almost till the time you deliver, if it's an active delivery. Okay, so you can't really transfer. But hospitals, by other regulators, which we'll see, are responsible for what's called a safe patient discharge. Okay, and the patient has to be given all sorts of little documents to sign, which basically state their rights as patients of what they can do and what they can't do. Okay, so I can't take a patient of mine from the inpatient unit and send them to an LTAC, okay, from a long-term acute care, if the patient doesn't sign and say, I'm agreeable to go. That's a violation of my, what we call certificate of participation, because I did not produce a safe discharge. Now, I can say, okay, we have to appeal. Okay, so then that goes to the appeals, and then somebody, third party, impartial, will look at it and say, no, the patient's right, they gotta stay, or they'll go like, no, boot them out the door. And then I come to the patient and say, look, you lost the appeal, so you got a couple of different choices. You can either go where I send you, or you can stay in a really, really, really expensive hotel. Okay, because that's what hospitals then become. Okay. All right, and then we have the Affordable Care Act, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and that happened in 2010. Okay, regulators and their roles. We have CMS, which is basically Medicare and Medicaid. They're a federal program. They operate under different sections. There's Part A, which applies to hospitals, Part B, which applies to physicians, Part C, which applies to managed care companies or HMOs, and Part D, which applies to pharmaceutical companies. There's the Agency for Healthcare Administration, which is basically a part of CMS, and that's the one that monitors, runs, and checks Medicaid, to make sure that everything is going safely for their beneficiaries, for their members. So if I have a Medicaid patient that I take in a wheelchair and I leave them out in the curve, ACA will come and review the case and pull my license. And then my facility will close. So we are very careful with that, okay? Health and Human Services has a bunch of different little departments underneath it. Remember that they came from the Department of Health and Food, and I forget what the other health, and DHS, whatever it was called. They're also the sponsors for the NIH, okay, National Institute of Health. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality is the one that's responsible as a patient safety organization. So they're the ones that look at adverse outcomes. When people die in your hospital, they fall, break their legs, they get a complication from the surgery, they cut the wrong leg off, whatever it is. Okay. The Office of Inspector General is a legal office, and they are responsible for investigating any issues that happen with any of these other agencies. Okay, and they're investigating it from a perspective of fraud, waste, and abuse, so we'll talk about later. The certificate of participation is basically the contract that the provider has with the federal government. And certificates of participation aren't just, it's not a straight commutative relationship, it's not altruistic, right? The government imposes a contract on you. They say, if you want to participate in this program, this is what you have to do. And there are fulfillment components of the certificate of participation. Reimbursement and billing, that's a whole different conundrum. We'll talk about it a little bit at the end. But basically, the system has evolved into what's called an RVU for E&M system. RVU is called a relative value unit. So everything that's done has a number assigned to it. So if I see you under observation, I may get 1 relative value unit. If I do a cardiac cath and an angioplasty, I'll get 3.5 relative value units. And that's how they figure out how much money they have to spend on each one of these things. And the way that they gauge whether I did something is by my evaluation and management code. So evaluation means I made a diagnosis, and management means I did something about it. So you have to have all those components before you can say, give me $1, okay? CPT are the numbers that they use to track what you're doing. Okay, so those are what's called current procedural codes. Okay, so those for every activity that you do. So if I do a colonoscopy, I get a CPT. Okay, and ICD is the International Classification of Diseases. So everywhere in the world, they use the same diagnostic codes. That's what those are. Okay. And we're in ICD number 10. The United States just adopted ICD-10 3 years ago. Okay, so we're about 15 years behind the rest of the world, but we're 7,000 times more complicated than everybody else because we adopted every regulation, every type of descriptor that there is. Okay, and DRG again is that diagnosis-related grouping, which basically puts all these diagnoses together and puts it into one kitty, one bundle, and says, this is how much we pay for this disease. Okay, for all the things that you do. This DRG encompasses ICDs and CPTs, RVUs and EMNs. Okay?
Dr. Martinez.
Yes.
Dr. A quick question.
Sure.
Where do I go let's give an example. Let's say that I'm a patient.
Yeah.
And there is a violation of EMTALA that I feel. So where do I go? Because I see that there is a lot of regulation. As a patient, I do not know where to call or where to write.
You can go to 3 different places. Okay. You can first go to the hospital itself and speak with the patient safety officer, or what they used to call risk management. You can go to the insurer or payer that's applicable to that patient. So if it's a commercial insurance product, if it's Medicare, if it's Medicaid, if it's an HMO, you can go there. And then finally, you can go to the OIG, Office of Inspector General, that's federal. So more than likely, you would go to the state Office of Inspector General and let them know that there's an EMTALA violation, and then they will investigate and move it on to wherever they think is best. But yeah, it just depends to what level you want to take it or what level it occurs at. But
okay.
One of the regulators. Sure.
Thank you.
If you go to the wrong one, they'll send you to the right one. Okay, so other healthcare regulatory, the Food and Drug Administration, they're the ones that see how much color our food has. The Drug Enforcement Agency is the one that regulates what class of medications are put into. So there's a thing now with the opiate epidemic. Those are restricted classification medications, and you have to have a particular number to be able to prescribe them. The Center for Disease Control, they have a bunch of different issues that they deal with, but it's basically public health. Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, so you can't throw away non-biodegradable plastic bags. OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, primarily labs. They make sure everything's clean, everything's safe, that you're running the labs correctly, and that your employees are safe. Okay, that you're not making them use Bunsen burners when they're not looking. And they're under, I put DOL, that's the Department of Labor. is the one that runs OSHA. There's the Health Resources and Services Administration, which was assigned for the federal HIV and AIDS programs. And then, interestingly enough, there's a Federal Bureau of Investigation, which has lots of funds in the healthcare industry, looking at everything that we do. And now there's the IRS, because if you didn't buy insurance, the IRS will penalize you. There's non-government ones, such as the Joint Commission, which investigates and regulates and accredits hospitals. There's the Institute of Medicine, which proposes best practices. There's Leapfrog, which grades healthcare systems and hospitals. And those are all public-based or publicly distributed findings, except for the Joint Commission. You can't find out if a Joint Commission said this is a good hospital or a bad hospital. That's protected under Congress. And then there's things like registries, like the National Cardiac Data Report and CDR, which I know a lot because I'm a cardiologist, and so it tells cardiologists whether they're doing a good job or not. And again, all of this is matched data based on comparative data from every physician nationally. The Government Accountability Office is the one that makes sure that the money is being spent correctly. If it's not, then they'll come after you. They'll send you over to the Office of Inspector General and the FBI and IRS, and you'll have a lot of discussions with them. Why? Because there's a lot of different things that they're looking for. They call it fraud, waste, and abuse, and those type of things can be billing for services not rendered, trying to bill something for a higher level than what you did, upcoding of items. So I brought you a commode and I charge you for a CT scan. Unbundling, that means taking a thing that should be together and spacing it out. I did your right hand one day and the left hand the other day. Actually, you can do both at the same time, so you shouldn't bill them that way. Excessive services, so that means that instead of going in there and sewing up your laceration on your hand, I went ahead and I did a whole body CT scan. And unnecessary services means that I did something that you didn't need. So I decided to do an appendectomy when your appendix was fine. Kickbacks is basically bribes. And copy and paste, that has to do with the electronic medical record. Every electronic medical record reflects your evaluation and management. It is a legal document, and you can't duplicate them because that's plagiarism. And plagiarism in the federal government is a legal offense. The Office of Inspector General, again, is the one that takes care of you when you've done bad things, and they use the Federal Bureau of Investigation to make sure that the things that you did are appropriately dealt with. You can end up in prison time, you can be deported, you can have gigantic fines, or you can be asked to give restitution, which means that if they think you overbilled by $1,000, they'll ask for the $1,000 back. The Affordable Care Act, this is Obamacare, provided an additional $350 million to pursue physicians for fraud, waste, and abuse. Okay. So what does regulatory framework means? Basically, regulations is the way that the government works. Okay, it's the model for enacting what it is that they want to do. So every time that they're doing a regulation, they're doing it because they want to get something out of it. They're just not doing it because it's something good to do. They're doing it because that's the way they want to get their goals met. We're basically getting to the point now where physicians are looking that this is excessive. There's a polemic whether this is or is not. We can discuss a little bit more. Again, the top regulatory issues are HIPAA breaches, which means that you lose the patient's information. Again, you could lose big fines, or you could end up in jail, or you could lose your license. So you think that that's kind of, okay, that makes sense. But if you think about what is this this company that just lost a bunch of information?
Equifax.
Equifax. Okay, so Equifax did this. They just lost much more information than you could in any of these HIPAA things, because once you get that information, you can actually get all your medical records from whoever. To them, it's like, okay, fine, you know, don't do it again, whatever. But there's no legislation like this for them. There is in the healthcare field, but there's nothing for them. So they may get sued by some private attorneys. But in essence, the federal government just says, don't do that again. There's false claims and whistleblowers. These are the people who turn you in. That's a Civil War level of law, which was people ripping off the government during the Civil War. They're saying, I'm going to sell you a bunch of muskets, and they wouldn't sell you, you end up didn't get any. So whistleblowers are people who basically are either within the system or are engaged in the fraud, but they decide to turn state's evidence, okay? And they get a large compensation for that. So if there's a monetary value to the fraud, let's say it's $100 million in fraud that occurred, you may make a deal and you may get 60% of that from the federal government. The federal government usually takes the majority of it. It's a lucrative business. Anti-kickback and physician hospital issues. This is a Stark law. Physicians in the United States are seen as independent contractors. Okay, so you are a corporate entity unto yourself as a physician, and you are responsible for ethical health care. Okay, whatever that means. So physician-hospital relationships. Basically, under the Stark law, you got to be very careful if, as a facility, when you hire a physician, because it can be seen as a kickback. So if I hire orthopedic surgeon to cover my emergency room, and usually orthopedic surgeons get paid $250 an hour for covering a 12-hour shift everywhere else in the United States, and I'm paying my orthopedic surgeon $10,000 an hour, and it just so happens that that orthopedic surgeon tends to bring every single case in the world over to my facility, that could cause you a problem. Okay, so that's what that's all about. Okay, so that's compensation arrangements. Co-management compensations, again, they fulfilling certain duties. So you cannot ever say, I will hire you and pay you this much, but you have to do the same amount of work. So I can't hire a physician and say, I'm going to pay you $200,000 a year, but you got to make $250,000 a year. If not, I'm going to fire you. You can't do that. Okay? You hire a physician because of need, not because they're going to make you money. If you're trying to do it because of to make you money, it becomes a co-management violation. Changes in reimbursement. The Affordable Care Act basically decreased reimbursement. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Antitrust issues, that's basically the same thing as monopolies. So every hospital in the United States cannot get together and say, we're all going to charge $1 for an aspirin. Okay, it makes sense, but we can't do it. It's against the law. So I charge $5. The guy down the block decides to charge $1. Hey, we all got to do it in our own way. All right? If we do kind of get together and start doing that price fixing, we get into trouble. And again, that's the key with physicians and being independent contractors. It's very difficult to get physicians together as a group and make a business decision. It has to be very well structured legally. There's structures where you can do it, because if not, they're colluding and creating price fixing events. So contracting is very complicated. Recovery audit contractors are the people the federal government pays to look into everything and get their money back. And there's different levels of the state, federal, regional. And they administer how much is being spent and if it's appropriately being spent. Tax-exempt hospitals under the Affordable Care Act, that would be the non-for-profits, now have to document conducting community health needs assessment programs. Okay, before you were a non-for-profit, it was just a nice thing and you were being good and whatever, you're having bake sales, whatever it is that you were doing, that was all okay. You just declared yourself a non-for-profit. It was your tax returns and your structure was different, okay? Now you have to actually prove that you're a benefit to be, and the federal government will close down the facility. They have already closed down facilities because they do not have adequate community health needs assessment plans. Okay, so you got to go into the community and say, this community, I'm a non-for-profit, I'm here for altruistic purposes. That's what the federal government allows. And I went to this community and I noted that there were a bunch of mommies and babies that weren't being adequately nourished. So I'm setting up a nutrition program for the community, a free nutrition program. That's what I'm doing with my money. Okay? Not buying another hospital. Employment and labor issues, disabilities, okay? Equality under the law, right? If you can't speak, all right, the hospital's got to get you a sign language person. If you're from Ukraine, I got to get a Ukrainian translator. If you can't hear, I got to get you a board or something to type on. I got to get people stuff to maximize their abilities and minimize their disabilities. Okay? One of the issues that we're back and forth is therapy dogs. Okay, people want to bring their dogs, and it's like, okay, there's a therapy dog. Well, what is your issue that you need this therapy dog in the hospital? So, and I'm not criticizing. We allow them, but it just can't be everybody's little pet being a hog. It's not safe, right? It's a real conundrum how to treat them. Consent. Okay, everything that's done to you as a patient, you have to be informed. And you have to be informed to the greatest extent that allows you to make the best decision possible. It has to be documented. And if it's not, we're in violation. Okay, so EMTALA, again, we talked about that, about not transporting patients that don't need to be transported. Another issue is shortages of resources as we expand under Obamacare. We have more patients coming into our systems. We need more resources, more doctors, more nurses, more techs, more everything. So hospitals are becoming one of the leading employers, definitely in the state of Florida, but throughout the United States. End of life issues. The last line is where we have a theological, moral, ethical issue. Okay? Finance of end-of-life care. And that's what's coming next, by the way. So that's in your horizon, how you're going to deal with that. And that's a good subject for your bioethics class. But it's definitely coming. Medication shortages, that was created by a good-intentioned component of making everybody go to generics, which were cheaper. But it turns out that the companies that make the generics don't make a lot of money. So they close, and then another company comes along and they make it, but now they charge more because nobody else is making it. There's no competition. So it's actually, exactly, generics are becoming sometimes more expensive than the brand names. It's an amazing thing. You're right, doctor. How can these ethical problems be solved? This is a slide from the presentation. It basically just says ethics, and talk to people. I don't really know if this can be solved, but again, you look for a solution. Key challenges, and this statement is what I wanted to focus on. Compliance and corporate responsibility are the same. Okay, so in other words, ethics and compliance are now a corporate issue. They're no longer a moral issue. Being a corporate issue, it's subject to laws and regulations. So your determinations on what's right and wrong, what you should do and what you shouldn't do, is no longer based on philosophical, moral, or just grounds. It's based on regulations and laws. 3 takeaways, again, education, continual upgrading the non-fragmented system. And I wanted to show you this. Okay, so this is my facility's Ethics and Compliance Committee agenda. Okay, we are rated as the most ethical corporation in the United States.
That's nice.
Okay, what does ethics mean? So ethics means compliance. So what do we talk about? So we talk about discharge planning, education, ER wait times, any issues with the Office of Inspector General, with the General Services Accounting Office. We talk about HIPAA. We talk about medical records, make sure that none of them are lost. With Federal Exchange Commissions, we talk about EMTALA events. We talk a lot about pharmacy stuff where everybody's got their DEA numbers, and make sure that nobody's diverting, stealing drugs from the hospital. We do that. We have great ratings, makes us the most ethical company in the world.
It's your what?
Most ethical company in the world. Okay, so there's a difference, you see. The way people see ethics from the perspective of the practical applied component within healthcare versus the way we view ethics as a fundamental component model tool to create a healthcare delivery system. Okay, and there's more of that. I'm not gonna go. Okay, so healthcare reform, Obamacare. Affordable Care Act, 3 things. Financing. We wanna spend less money, get away from fee-for-service, and go to a more controlled healthcare environment. Delivery systems, we wanna create new delivery systems, which will provide greater access at lower cost. In coverage expansion, we want everybody to be insured. So we want a good model, but it's still based on traditional healthcare insurance. Okay, the grand bargain basically is in the Affordable Care Act, everybody gets paid less. Okay, you're gonna get paid less for everything you do. But supposedly there's going to be more people paying. So if you were paid a nickel for your gum, now you're going to be paid a penny, but now 5 people are going to be buying your gum, so you're going to get the nickel anyway.
You can only see them in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so some of the reactions for the Affordable Care Act, there's a mandate, employer mandate. They have to insure their employees, not bad, but what do the employees do? They still want to make money, so they basically fire their employees. Okay, an outcome.
No, wait a minute, I missed that.
Oh, okay, sure.
They say they want to make sure the employees do what?
No, there's an employer mandate in the Affordable Care Act. So if you're 50, a company that has 50 employees or more, you have to provide insurance for your employees. Okay. So what if I have a company that has 56 employees? What do I do? I can either provide health insurance for the 56 employees, or I can fire 6 people. Okay, so I balance the cost, I balance the use, and companies are goodbye. They actually, what they do is there's a lot more, I don't know if you've noticed, a lot more what we call subcontractors.
Yeah, instead of working 40 hours a week, you work 30 hours.
30 hours a week.
That's very Europe. They brought that in from Europe.
Before I may have had a janitor who was working for me. I fire him and I hire a janitorial company. I only had 5 janitors. The janitorial company has 15 janitors. I would have had to have paid for those 5 janitors insurance. I only have to pay this company for the service of janitorial services, and they're small enough because that's all they do. They don't have to pay any insurance. So there's a lot of subcontracting. That's the way they're really getting around it. Understanding the exchanges. Okay, it has a 4-limb component. Who will purchase? In other words, the risk pool. How exchange plans differ from the current plans. And the difference is really subsidies, which is number 3. And how do you get people to understand this and buy into these exchanges? So education. So risk pools, the idea is that if you don't have any money, but you're forced to buy insurance, right? and you don't have any money, so I give you the money to buy the insurance. You'll be in the insurance pool, but you won't really need the insurance, so you won't spend any of the insurance money. And so your risk premium will be low. Remember, we talked about risk premiums. So the insurance company can then absorb the cost of higher premium members and average that to a lower cost for the higher premium members. Okay, you kind of understand that? So basically what they're doing is taking the healthy to pay for the unhealthy and balancing that out. Okay, and the way they do this is by forcing the healthy to buy insurance. Individual education, so you got to explain to people what this is. If not, they won't buy it. So they had a big component of, you saw buses everywhere and ads and all these phone numbers and a computer login system that didn't work and all that stuff that happened. But basically the whole idea is to get a lot of people in there. For this to work, a lot of people have to be in there because it's an insurance pool. So the pool risk has to be evenly distributed, because if you only get sick patients in, you're going to spend too much money and your insurance company is going to go out of business. Okay? However, it turns out that it's more expensive than the traditional system, because Obamacare is more expensive than the traditional system, because the traditional system selected low-risk patients already. If you were high risk, they really didn't want to insure you, so they wouldn't go after you. So their premiums tended to be low, because that's how they were able to make money. Remember what I told you the example. An insurance company has 10 members that pay $10 at the end of the year, they have $100. Okay? If they spend $100, they made no money. If they spend $99, they got $1. If they spend $50, they made 50 bucks. Okay? So how do I not spend money? By insuring people that won't spend any money. Okay? You can't do that under the Obamacare, because everybody's got insurance. So you're going to get sick people. And so the actuaries are going to calculate that and say, your premium's got to go up because there's just not enough healthy people to cover the sickness of the sick people. So the insurance rates keep going up, keep going up. Federal government has a solution, which is basically subsidies and alternate levels or types of care. For the employers, they basically give them subsidies so that they'll stay in the pools, because the whole thing, again, it's getting a lot of people in it, or else it won't work. The math won't work. They mandate from the insurers a broader scope of coverage that also increase costs. So stuff that they may not have been covering or that you may not need is in your plan. Now everybody's got the same plan. It's equality, right? I can get contraceptive pills.
Isn't everybody paying for?
Everybody pays for this. Yeah, everybody pays across the board.
For the Band-Aid.
Yeah, everybody pays for the Band-Aid, right? Yeah, and everybody gets a Band-Aid. Everybody pays for the Band-Aid. Okay, or whether you get it or not, that's up to you, but it's paid for. Okay, and preventive care, which is a good thing, is at low cost, but preventive care is basically, I don't want to do it this way, but it's kind of pseudo medicine from the perspective you can put anything into that bucket. Okay, so therapy dogs are preventive care.
Question. I don't know much about Obamacare, and I don't know that. You say is that okay, one person doesn't have insurance, and then probably is at some kind of level of to receive money per year, right? So is that person's going to I don't know, 20,000 probably per year. So that person buy an insurance from Obama, right?
Okay.
Oh, if that person wants to pay monthly, just so a small quote, not too high quote, right?
Yeah, it doesn't matter, really, because in Obamacare, okay, it's income based, really. So if you buy a very expensive insurance, because that's the insurance that ends up being, and you don't have enough money to pay for it, you'll get a subsidy from the federal government. Okay, so if you buy an insurance for $10, but that insurance costs $50, the federal government will give you $40. If I buy the same insurance from another company and they charge me $25, the federal government will give me 25 bucks. So it's basically just depends where you buy it and who you buy it. But the problem is that since costs go higher, the profits go higher, okay, actuarials basically base themselves on the standard that was preset. So if everybody made $100 more, the following year, okay, you're not allowed to make less for you to set your premium. The actuarial said, for you to cover, you made $100 more. So this year, you have to make $100 more again. So there's no way costs can go down. All that'll happen is when you make more money that year, instead of making 100, now you made 20 bucks more. So now you got $120. So the following year, you say, no, you can't go down. You got to make $120 that year. So then you got $130. Okay, so now you're going to make $130 and so on and so on. So it's a progressively escalating cost for the insurer, the way insurances are structured. Okay, there's no way it can ever be cheaper under the system. Okay, you can model and fish around and create all sorts of things for people to spend less, but because it's insurance based, it'll always be higher.
And excuse me, my ignorance. I don't know, but somebody was telling me about the person who are in Obamacare in the end of the year, they have to pay some kind of taxes or more high than.
They may, yeah, because if you made more money than you declared on your application for the insurance, creating the federal government paying more than they should have. So let's say your income is $30,000. You're entitled for the federal government to pay $25. But at the end of the year, you ended up making $40,000. That means the federal government would only have had to pay $15. You took an extra 10. That's the same thing as taxes. So they'll see that and they'll tax you at whatever rate that puts you at. And you have to pay that back, the $10 plus the tax rate. Yeah, and that's why the IRS is in all those regulators now.
Well, that's why a lot of people is paying in taxes a lot of money and they feel they are written off or they
okay, I'll get through the end of this. It's a system set up not to work. It can't work the way it's structured.
That's very clear.
Basically, I'm going to skip a lot of it because we're running out of time. But all I wanted to show you is this is what they're actually trying to gain. Okay? The little gray line here, okay, is the individual's contribution. Okay? This is what their expectation is of the subsidies. Okay, so in the end, what they want to do is make you pay for your own insurance, mandate it, and then you'll be progressively more responsible for your cost. That's where all that education comes from. Okay, so if you look at your premiums now, your premiums have gone higher, but your deductibles have also gone higher. If you look at your policies, if you have an insurance policy. So you may have paid, whatever, $5 per primary care visit. Okay, this year you're probably paying 20. Okay, if you go to the hospital, who knows?
So in the end, what it's really boiling down to is the fact that even though they thought that they made the public think that you were going to get your insurance cheaper.
Sure.
In fact, you're paying as much, if not more.
More. Progressively, you will pay more. Yes. And in the end, if you remember that, very intuitive, you got it perfect. In the end, remember that slide that I showed you with the green line and the red line? Yeah. Okay. What happens when people start getting unhappy? More and more laws and regulation, more and more laws and regulation. Where do you end up?
More and more costs.
More and more costs. And who runs the whole thing then?
The government.
The government. And you get, so people just say, I don't like this universal health care. That's where they're going.
Well, I mean, that's what we should have.
Yeah, I'm not arguing for or against it. I'm just saying this is what this is all about.
So when the person buy the insurance from Obamacare, they don't explain what's happening.
No.
That's what they say about the educational component. It's complicated. Look how long we've been here and what it is that I've been able to very humbly try to express to you in a very inefficient manner. And I'm just kind of surfacing over what's really going on. this system is, remember, pages of regulations and pages of regulators and pages of regulatory bodies and laws, and all of that's all in a big spaghetti. So it's like you stick your finger in there and you say, where am I at? You know, this is all this stuff going on. It's very difficult. The U.S. healthcare system is exceedingly difficult. I more or less understand it. That's kind of where I have my job. But I can see 100% where my mom, you know, God rest her soul, didn't have a clue. She was, you know, in an ALF, 70-something years old on oxygen in a wheelchair. I'm not going to go through this. Yeah. Just like, you know, get me better, feel me better, whatever. You know, there's no way. There's no way. So I feel for people. I really do.
So when they say only $10 and $20 for the insurance, it's really
Yeah, but it's $10 for insurance to go see a doctor. Okay, you go see the doctor, take your blood pressure, that's another $3. Then you could do this, $20. They look at your eye, that's $5. So yeah, $10 to go see, to walk in the office, to open the door, sit down and get called into the room. But after that, it all starts escalating.
I've noticed.
It's better than nothing.
When you go to urgent
Thank you,
care,
because I didn't know anything, and when this person told me about it,
Yeah.
in the taxes, I don't understand, so approach is wrong. So I got to have a little more clear idea and never go inside. I don't know about Obamacare or anything, but
Yeah.
I have more idea.
And I do want to say, I say Obamacare not as a derogatory, it's just the way that it's called, and the Obama administration called it that, so we're just going with it. Okay.
one thing I've noticed, like when you go to urgent care now,
Yeah.
they literally have like a sheet
A menu.
of
Yeah.
all what it costs.
Mhm. Yeah.
Is that because the deductibles? Just
Yeah,
won't cover them?
deductibles and the fee-for-service components of it, the commercial insurance components of it, and this, yeah, the deductibles, like you said.
Because I've never seen that before.
So again, we talked about scarce resources, appointments, nurses, expanding access through different types of healthcare delivery systems, the minute clinics, freestanding ERs, federally qualified clinics, and this, when you're talking collecting deductibles. So they say, you better collect your deductibles, you're not gonna make any money.
Right.
All right, so that's what that slide says, challenging front office. Okay, so that means when you go in and say, you can't see the doctor until you pay your deductible. Okay, winners and losers, some of the hospitals are doing well, some of the hospitals are not doing well. Catholic hospitals, unfortunately, aren't doing that well. It's just because of their faith-based constructs a lot of times. Problems, again, we're getting older. There's a shift in who insures us. So if we have a lot more people getting older and we're going into Medicare, we're not going to be in the Obamacare. The risk pool is going to change. So there's not going to be enough young people to make up for the unhealthy people. Boatloads of federal funds. That's just basically what got this through. Every problem was solved by another grant. Okay? What happens? The budget is way out of control. These programs are unsustainable from the perspective of budget. But now what do? This is it. This is what we got. Everybody's in this. It's been 7 years. We've been at this system. So how are you going to change it now? So that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in. They want more risk pools. That has to do more with the PSOs, MSOs, HMOs, that stuff that we talked about. So those are the healthcare models that will be coming. And what must be addressed? Basically everything, but it does grant an opportunity for more access, and it is healthcare legislation. I have the second part of the lecture. We have 5 minutes, so I'm going to just kind of skip to the end. Thank you for staying as much as you could. I don't know if this will project. Does this project? How does this work? Okay. And I just want to get to one slide at the end. What do I do?
You want me to?
Yeah, how does it project up here?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I
All right.
thought you
I don't know. Okay. So I think we can break here pretty much, And I'll just end with some statements because I can't really get this to show up. The Catholic Church has an issue with Obamacare for two reasons. One is everything that has to do with contraception, abortion, and so on. But the other one has to do with the mandates. The Catholic Church very much believes in individual freedom, the integrity, divinity of each individual person, and how each individual person should react. Okay? Jesus Christ healed a lot of people. Okay? But he never forced anybody to be healed. Okay? He offered, he was present. If you came to him in faith, he would heal you. That's where the Catholic Church comes from. Okay? Jesus Christ will heal everybody, poor, rich, tall, short, whatever, but it's a free choice. Okay? And that's all that the Catholic Church says. A lot of people say we're contradictory because we are in favor of universal health care. From that perspective, we are in favor of affordable care. From that perspective, we are in favor of broad care. We're in favor of immigrant care. We're in favor of resident care. We're in favor of care for the elderly, the care for the young. But it's all free. It has to, not free from the person, but it has to be a free exchange. Okay, it has to be communicative. Okay, and based on the social ethics, social justice theories of the church. There's a lot of documents on it. There's Laborum Excerns and Passamentaris and Evangelium Gaudium. The popes have published a lot of things, and they're on the second slide set. I'm sure that they made them available to you. If you look at the beginning of the second presentation, we have some stuff from Ron Emanuel, not Ron Emanuel, his brother, who was an ethicist. And if you read it, it has a very cynical tone, okay, to human beings. If you look at the United States College of Bishops responses, it has a very pastoral tone of what it is that they're addressing. So we have to come to it from the perspective of how we achieve what we want to achieve through a moral ethics component, not through a legislative ethical component, not through a legal issue. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say for today. I'm sorry to get through all these slides, but please, if you have an opportunity, you want to review them. They're interesting. I do believe I give them to Father Shofi. I'm not a technical person, so I can't send them, but I hope that he would do it.
How do you call the PowerPoint? Because we don't have that.
Oh, goodness. I have no idea what you call it.
The
All right.
PowerPoint has the
Yeah. One of them, let me see. So how do I say goodbye to everybody? We're done. Thank you so much for joining us.
I have a question, Doctor.
Okay. Yes, no problem. I'm so sorry.
And so, well, first of all, I want to congratulate you. This was an excellent.
Well, thank you so much. You're most
Yes, I noticed a lot of material and a lot of information that maybe we have to digest little by little. But
okay.
no, I'm very worried about specifically with HIPAA in psychiatric patients.
Sure.
I understand. I heard. I don't know if this is true. That even I'm talking because all this. Problem with the guns and people killing, you know, and they have some time history of psychiatric issues.
Right.
The psychiatric cannot disclosure any information about this person. So how can, I mean, where this fit, how the autonomy or the privacy of a one person can be more important than the safety of the community?
Right. Okay. So if you ever get the slide set, which I'm not 100% sure, there's a couple of, let me see if I can find them here, Vatican documents on, and you can look them up, on a subject called subsidiarity. Freedom and privacy.
Mhm.
And just go to the Vatican website, put in those words for search, and it'll take you to the documents. I have them here. It's on slide 46 of my part 2.
Okay. Yes, I can see it.
But basically, it's in the Catholic Catechism. Go to the Catholic Catechism. Number 1883, in short, says excessive intervention by the state can threaten personal freedom and initiatives.
Yeah. Yes, I can.
1884, God has not willed to reverse to himself all exercise of power. Oh, to reserve. I'm sorry, not to reverse. 1885, subsidiarity is opposed to all forms of collectivism. In other words, maintain the divinity of the individual. It's a personal relationship.
Yes.
491, professional secrets. Okay, and then it goes into the subject that you're talking about and how to deal with it in a catechetical way. And 2492 deals with privacy and freedom. And basically all it is saying is, and I'm going to paraphrase, and please read it and discuss it with others more instructed in the catechisms and with Father Shofi and so on. But all of this saying is privacy is appropriate if you are not doing harm. We are not in confession.
Exactly.
Okay? So if somebody tells you something that is harmful, it is not within the scope of what we would consider moral and ethical, because we have a privacy relationship, a communicative private relationship with the person. We have to think of the good versus the bad of that decision. And if it needs to be disclosed, then we may have to disclose it. And if it requires us to pay penalties for it, we have to sacrifice for the good who we are, right? We die in Christ. So if the nature of the created world makes us do things that we don't want to do, and we choose to die in Christ, then we will have to separate ourselves from the created world. Does that kind of answer your question?
Thank you.
Now,
yes.
From a legal perspective, let me get to a more practical component. The state of Florida has a legal component as far as identifying patients' guns on the medical record. Okay? So that hasn't passed yet, but some states have it. So it depends where you're practicing, what kind of practice you have. But in some states, you have to disclose if a patient owns a gun or not. From the perspective of the Baker Act, remember, you are able to create a forcible component of treatment for a person who is deemed to be a danger to themselves or to others. So if I come in and I say, I'm going to go outside and I'm going to take these 2 knives and start sticking in everybody who walks by me, just because of my privacy component, I don't got to say, well, don't do that and I can't tell anybody. I hope it doesn't happen. You do Baker Act that person. Okay. You say, well, I'm calling the police and I'm calling an ambulance and we're going to stick you in the hospital for a while till you either get better or something else happens to you.
Exactly.
A little more practical perspectives. But yeah, there is a component of privacy that you have to modify with the moral and ethical issues. And that might be another additional component of the discussions of your classes.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Doctor?
Yes.
When you spoke of the amount of money spent for insurance, it was obvious to me when California started raising their minimum wage,
sure.
that seemed to be an unknown element to everybody, that would in turn hit taxes back to the federal government.
Of course, yes.
Nobody was talking about that, and if they had, a lot of that controversy would have been reduced.
Yes, I would tell you, the more you understand a particular issue, this is the one we happen to be discussing today, But the more you understand a particular issue, the better insights you can have on the policies that are being proposed.
Yeah.
As opposed to taking them as a component of propaganda,
Right.
and taking a side, you have to really analyze what the foundation is. The politicians aren't as dumb as most people think. I shouldn't say you. Most people.
No, I understand what you mean.
They're pretty
Very
devious.
complex people.
Complex people. They really have been.
Whenever people
through the mill,
assume somebody's dumb, they need to stop and think. Maybe they're throwing smoke.
Yes, exactly. So you got to think through the issue. My perspective is always to have a very fundamental perspective of who I am,
Right.
what my values are, and make sure and work hard that my values are well founded. And
So
then from there, I can see things from that perspective, and it makes it easier.
well, I noticed that you keep yourself very well balanced, even though I can see there's emotion one way or another, and allow yourself to float through it because there's always something else that may be underlining that would influence your final decision.
Yes, and as a physician, from that perspective, that's the way not only I've been trained, but that was my vocation. That's kind of the way I approached life. But I will tell you that I have come to the point where I do understand the difference of the gift that God gives me
Okay.
versus what is the created world.
Right.
Okay? So I no longer expect perfection from myself.
Right.
I need redemption.
Right.
Or from anybody else or any other system.
Right.
What we can do is try our best based on the foundations, the true good foundations that we have, and then move from there. We're not always going to be successful in everything, and we have a healthcare system now. It's doing what it does.
Right.
There'll be other changes to it, and they'll do what they do, and hopefully they'll get better with time. But it's never going to be perfect because that's not where we live right now.
Well, and that's something that a lot of people expect in themselves, so therefore they try to project it out. Not that I would ever do that.
There's a slide in there, and I'm sorry I couldn't get to it. The rest, the part 2 is all discussion, so there's nothing didactic in it. But there's a slide in there that says Americans no longer can accept being told that they are wrong.
Mm-hmm.
A statement from somebody.
Yeah.
And when you get to that point, it's very hard to be right.
Is a problem too.
Of course.
Thank you again for your work.
Sure, it was truly a pleasure. And again, forgive me, I didn't get through all the material, but I tried to pack it as best as I could, and I didn't maybe have as much time to prepare so I could have efficiently gone through it. But thank you. It was a real pleasure. Congratulations for being in the course, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you, Dr. Martinez.
thank you. Bye-bye now. Somebody turn me off. Okay, so this is mine.
Yeah. Hold on.
Doctor,
Is
excuse
Dr.
me, I
Schofield-
come late.